This is Spirit Gym. Today's episode is a journey into the heart of what really makes us wealthy. Get ready to challenge some big assumptions, like the idea that wealth and spirituality don't mix, that success requires burnout, that health is a luxury, or that love, joy, and breath work are soft skills that have nothing to do with your bottom line. In this episode, Paul is joined once again by his longtime client, Jason Pickard. Jason isn't just a former Wall Street trader who made millions. He's someone who's walked the path from material riches to real wealth, health, love, purpose, and spiritual freedom. Paul and Jason are diving deep into the invisible intangibles of wealth, the unseen forces that make or break your prosperity from the inside out. They'll be discussing how to master the inner game, tapping into the 97% of wealth most people ignore. It's about flow, purpose, and creating abundance that actually feels good. So if you've ever made money but still feel empty, or if your search for financial success seems to be actually making you poorer, then you'll want to keep listening. For the first time ever, Jason is releasing the exact breathwork practice he used during his time on Wall Street, the same one that helped him perform at the highest level without burning out. It's called the Inner Wealth Code, and it's designed to align your energy with the frequency of abundance in just minutes a day. Until now, this practice was reserved exclusively for Jason's private clients and retreat attendees, but today he's offering it to Spirit Gym listeners completely free. If you're ready to unlock a deeper level of clarity, alignment, and flow, head over to jasonpickard.org and claim your access. Before we join Jason and Paul, we'd just like to say thank you for listening, as this podcast would not be possible without you, our subscribers and followers. We'd also like to thank our premier sponsors, Organifi, Bioptimizers, Paleo Valley, and Wild Pastures, and our brand new sponsor, Correct Life. You'll hear their special offers and discounts throughout this episode, or visit the show notes page at paulchek.com/podcast. And if you enjoy this episode, we invite you to explore the deeper levels of connection and conversation available in the Spirit Gym membership community. Go to myspiritgym.com for details.
Hello, everybody. Today, our title is Wealth, a Spiritual Path, Spiritual Keys to Financial Freedom, with my longest running client and my soul brother, Jason Pickard, who has worked with me for 15 years now and many other great masters. He's a very, very well-rounded, deep human being, as you're about to find out. If you haven't listened to any of my other podcasts with Jason, they're all absolutely fantastic. Jason, welcome to Spirit Gym with Paul Chek today.
Yeah, baby. I'm so honored to be here. What a joy, this life, to just be able to share in this way. I'm feeling very grateful.
Is this our fourth podcast?
I was thinking about that earlier today. I think we did 2 together, and we did one with Chase and Mimi was 3, and then I just interviewed you, which is a surprise for the listeners. I don't know when this podcast is going to come out, but I interviewed you about Spirit Gym on your show, which was number 4. So
I guess
this would be 5, I think.
Right,
yeah.
The Hierophant, which is a good archetype for today. Well, we're going to get into some very interesting stuff today. A little bit of it will be a revisiting of things we've covered before, I think, just to lay the foundation for the deeper dialogue on what we've titled the invisible intangibles of wealth and the spiritual path and creating freedom for ourselves. So my first point of kind of question for you is, I think we both agree on the definition of spirituality as a progressive connection to a greater whole. And while I appreciate that, and I know we both live that way, I also know you created a significant amount of financial wealth in your life as a trader before you embodied a spiritual lifestyle. So can you define what wealth is from a spiritual perspective and give us an idea of the different areas, arenas, or ways of expanding spirituality to embrace a greater whole, and how that actually translates to cultivation of greater wealth in one's life? So in essence, when I first started working with you 15 years ago, you didn't really have a spiritual grounding. And since then, you've done massive amounts of spiritual development and on many different fronts, even beyond our work together. And I've watched you really embody spirituality and become a living, breathing expression of it. And there's a lot of people that were like you when they came to me that had accumulated a lot of wealth. And of course, as you know, many of them have been my clients over the years. So I've worked with countless very wealthy people, but they were often suffocating really in the areas that make life most meaningful. And often their wealth was actually their greatest source of stress and imbalance, paradoxically. So I'd love it if you could sort of share your perspectives on what I've brought up here and just see how we can bring this into focus for the rest of the podcast for what we're really talking about with, a spiritual approach to wealth or wealth as a spiritual path and how to create financial freedom.
Thank you. I'd love to share in that. It's interesting before I get into the questions you just asked was, on reflection of my spiritual journey starting really in 2007, I was only 27 years old. So while I did have wealth at that point, especially relative to my age, the majority of my wealth came after, kind of the beginnings of the spiritual awakening and moving progressively on that path. I didn't retire from Wall Street till I was 40. So there really was the majority of my career where I was learning and exploring progressively these things. And when I first got on this path, as you know, I was 330 pounds. And so, I really don't think that the wealth would have been possible. And we're going to define what that means to me in a second, but I don't think it would have been possible in a sustainable way without killing myself, honestly, without opening to some of these intangibles that we're going to speak about. So, when you think about spirituality as being connected to a greater whole, which is your definition and a very good definition, the question comes in for me is what is that greater whole, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so if you look at the etymology of words, which is always a good place to start, as you know, spirituality or spirit comes from spirare, a Latin word spirare, which means the breath of life, or it means air or wind. Mm-hmm. Interestingly, conspirare means conspiracy, which ultimately means to breathe together.
Yeah.
Sitting down with somebody and saying, hey, I'm not sure about your view, but let's breathe together and figure this out and see if we can create a third. But we've kind of lost track of what really it means to be a true conspiracy. Mm-hmm. But, ultimately what we're saying is that spirituality is something like it's ephemeral, like the air or the wind. We can't measure it. We can't grab it. We can't contain it. In some ways, it's not material. We know it's there. We know we need it, but we can't kind of quantify it. Mm-hmm. And so, if the essence of spirituality, as pretty much every single religion and spiritual practice tells us, is love and gratitude and appreciation, we all know we need these things. We all know we need love. Love is the most important thing in our life. But as you told many times, you used to ask scientists who didn't really believe in anything that wasn't material, and you ask them what's the most important thing in their life, and they'd say love. And so, well, how can you quantify that? How can you objectively prove that it's there, but yet you would not be able to live, and your life would have no meaning without it? So essentially with this spiritual side is that we're saying that we are identifying with something that's not just here in the material world. That's not just a physical, tangible, tactile thing. So if you go into this, you find that most of the people that have sustainable wealth, like when I worked for Paul Tudor Jones and many other people that have really big wealth and really big missions, they all have something intangible behind it. It may be a mission, service, nourishment, fulfillment, passion, curiosity, the desire to invent something. These are all things that can't be weighed or measured. And, this is why biogeometry is a physics of quality and not quantity, studying the unseen or the qualitative sides of life. So what I found in my own personal story is that most people in kind of the matrix, as we might say, of the financial world and the corporate world are really focusing on the tangibles. They have this no pain, no gain attitude. And as we know, that can be a couple things. One is means without meaning, but ultimately it leads to burnout and a slew of other challenges, including inefficiency, unhappiness, lack of productivity, lack of creativity, body symptoms, broken relationships, etc. So when we break down this greater whole, this intangible spiritual part that we're pointing to, science itself will show us that what we can see in the tangible world is only about 1 to 3% of the available information that's out there. We can only see like 1% of visible light and sound and so forth. So our sensory organs are really a very limited tool to perceive all of the available information out there. So the question I have is if connecting to this greater whole, if connecting to intangibles is like connecting to the 97 to 99%, what would your life be like if you could have that kind of information and that kind of guidance? How could this improve your performance if you didn't have body symptoms because you were listening to the intangibles of your body? How could your performance improve if you didn't have the relationship challenges you had? How could your intuition, inspiration, imagination, creativity, by following synchronicities, having a purpose and service in your world, how could this actually improve your ability to make money? Now, this isn't just an esoteric concept because my former boss, Paul Tudor Jones, teamed up with Deepak Chopra to start a nonprofit organization called Just Capital. And they went out there and they studied like really what makes organizations tick and really what's behind the profitability. And ultimately, what they found was very interesting, that the companies that focus on the intangibles, basically focusing on their employees' happiness, well-being, giving them gyms, meditation centers, and things like that, that those employees were happier, and that those companies actually outperformed their peers. So when we think about wealth, wealth as a word is actually more linked to, I think, well-being. For example, I had wealth in the financial area, but I didn't have wealth in health. I didn't have wealth in love at that time. Some people think of the value behind wealth in different ways. Some person could put wealth into their garden. Some person could invest in their children. And just like we have a 401k possibly that might pay out in 30 years, their children might return an investment on them when they grow up to be amazing people and maybe even take care of them. So what I focus on really, as you know, is abundance, this abundance archetype, which I think is that when we have wealth in all areas of our life, we're wealthy financially, spiritually, and healthy, and wealthy in our relationships, and that all of these things work together. When we die, we can't take our money with us, right? So it's obviously not the most important driver out there. And if you ask somebody, if you had 24 hours to live, what would you do? I guarantee nobody's saying I'm going to work, right? Most people will say, I'm going to go around and give thanks and appreciation to everybody who had a big impact on my life. So what I think is happening is, like myself in my 20s, you wind up in a situation where what's the point if you're making all of this money to when you're 40 or 50 years old, you're lying in a hospital bed with poor health or disease, and then for the first time you're screaming, "Oh God, help me," right?
For the first time, yeah.
Yeah, it's like, it's too late, buddy. So I think the corporate world is unfortunately in, using the Steiner and, your previous podcast broke the Ahrimanic Luciferic Christ consciousness down in an incredible way. It's stuck in essentially an Ahrimanic mindset. And this leads to wealth in one area, but it leads to a host of other issues. On the other side of the coin, if you're fully into the Luciferic, what's the point? What's the point for the world, for the greater good of all, if you're sitting in a cave until you're 85 years old to hit enlightenment? And then what are you going to do with it? Who are you going to pass it on to? What are you going to create with it? So, this whole idea is, how do we bring all of these things together? And what I want to prove today is that by focusing on these intangibles are right there in supporting the tangibles and vice versa.
Yeah. What came to my mind as you were speaking is, in my studies of Houston Smith's teachings, he gives the example of a cross, just like a standard equal distance cross. And he defines the horizontal beam of the cross as the realm of matter and materialism and objectivity, anything you can weigh or measure. and that would be the domain of classical science. But he says the vertical beam is the beam of subjectivity, that is the beam of spirit. And he really beautifully explains that one of the main problems we have in the world is that people's consciousness has become overly oriented to just the horizontal beam of the objective, measurable, tangible, but they forgot that the source of all creation is the vertical dimension that is subjective, which is the dimension of love. It's Mark Goffney's field of value. It's ultimately where the most important things are, because like you mentioned, I often quote Jesus in the Bible, who says a rich man can no sooner get to heaven than a camel can fit through the eye of a needle. And the way I explain that to people is all you can take with you when you leave is what you've become, and you can't weigh or measure that in any means that we have available in science today. But there is a deep sense of wholeness, a deep sense of connection, like a person who's grown spiritually to realize the answer to the great question, who am I, has the feeling of returning home to the rest of the self, to the wholeness of themselves. And so there's not a lot of fear about leaving the orientation on the horizontal beam of the cross. But I think one of the things that I feel compelled to bring up is that we have this sort of spiritual kind of dogma that it's not spiritual to be wealthy. And so you get this from a lot of the Eastern religions, and even, Buddha starved himself and went through his whole asceticism. And there's so much of this in Christianity with the history of them starving and flogging each other. And the Bible, makes the world bad, and, the body is sinful. So we've got this kind of perverted relationship with spirit, and a lot of religion really confuses our relationship to both the spiritual and the material. And so I think it's I just know from my own experience in my own life that as I've grown this greater sense of connection to the whole, that the material things in my life have tended largely to be manifestations of my heartfelt intentions, particularly the ones that I felt were important for me to acquire in order to help other people. And so by looking at abundance from the perspective of God as infinite, and that abundance is even more abundant when we're using that abundance to make the world a better place for all living beings, and that we're conscious of our deeper relationship to all living beings, and that how we live and how we relate and how we use our money actually impacts the rest of us as a self, as a whole, then I think we get over a lot of these sort of bad ideas about money and body and world, and we, I know from myself. I mean, I've certainly never acquired the kind of money that you have in my life, but I've certainly made a lot of money. I've sold approximately $50 million worth of education in my career. And I've always really felt that money for me was a vehicle of creation. I wasn't ever worried about accumulating piles of it. I was like just asking Great Spirit, okay, help me create this next course, or, whatever it is. And somehow the money always flows. And I really believe love is a boomerang. And I think if we just orient our consciousness, our inner compass towards reciprocity, then the whole world changes from a monetary perspective, because money no longer is an object. It now becomes a way of expressing our love. That's just how I feel about that.
Yeah. So, a few things just to reply to those, because they're all really important points. I mean, in the story of money in your life, we could say as an example, it really comes down ultimately to one's dream and one's values. And so, in your situation, I know that you were, asked to sponsor Swiss balls, for example, and that would have brought you a lot of financial wealth, but it was against your core values, and so it would have given you some kind of a bankruptcy in another area, like in your heart, or in your, in maybe losing trust with your students or something like that. So a lot of times, we have wealth in different areas. It's just a matter of where are we focusing attention, what are we appreciating, and what are we putting values on. The thing with the spirituality is, like, I get a lot of my students will come to me and say, "Oh, I wish my partner," maybe a guy coming, say, "I wish my wife was more spiritual." And then, this whole thing is that we're putting spirituality into a box. And so I asked them, "Do you have a family?" "Yeah." Does your wife take care of the children? Does she educate them? Does she care for them? Does she clean them? Does she take care of the house? Does her ability to do that actually enable you to be more spiritual in your life? And so, like, who are you to say what's spirituality and what's not? If you're providing a service to the world, if you're running a company that's providing a service that's making the world better, how is that not spirituality? And this whole idea of separating wealth from spirit is really just a belief in a false idol. All of the religions of the world need the money in order to get their messages out there. Without it, you can't spread it. And in fact, it's, as you know, all of the great religions of the world were mostly founded upon good amounts of wealth. And
Yes.
so, when you go back and you study some of these people that we've considered, prophetic in history, great spiritual leaders and great mystics, a lot of them had wealth in one form or another. Some of them had wealth, like King David, for example, was a
Hmm.
very, very wealthy person, and that wealth enabled him the comfort and the time to not have to focus on those things, so they can get into these altered states of consciousness, and that they can download different kind of prophetic type of visions. And if they didn't have financial wealth, they had wealth in another way, in where maybe people valued what they were doing so much that they took care of them, where they didn't have to worry about those kinds of things. So, I think a lot of these things are kind of beliefs that I want to bust today, that these things have to be separate. I think the problem comes when the mission to make money is not aligned with the values of the heart, and it's not for the greater good of all. But if it's in alignment with making the world a better place, I think the universe supports that 100%. And you can rely on that part of connecting to that to support your mission.
Yeah, your analogy of the man coming and saying, my wife's not that spiritual, and maybe that can be a challenge. I've had that same situation arise many times. But I think a perspective I'd like to share on that, because it really does relate to everything we're talking about here, is that, first of all, if we look at what God really is, God is that for which there is no other. So when we use the word God in its actual sense, it means whatever it is that can create and sustain itself is the source of all that we know of as life, be it the universe or anything within the context of life itself. And by definition, that means there's nothing here but God, and everybody is God. But from an alchemical perspective, that when God dreams itself into form and condenses consciousness into matter, you have a high degree of entanglement. Really, matter is light entangled. So, a stone is actually, the atoms are spinning at just under the speed of light, but they're very entangled. So it creates the illusion of rigidity. And that rigidity has a tendency to make consciousness sort of fall asleep in itself. Like a stone is a source of proto-consciousness. And if you interact with it consciously, then you're actually projecting your consciousness into the stone, and you actually awaken the stone by using your own consciousness, which is just what a spiritual teacher does by projecting their consciousness and their love into their students, and their students become less like a stone and progressively awaken and become more like the sun as a metaphor. So what I think is important to understand is when we're in relationships with people that are, shall we say, not as awakened to the vertical beam of the cross, the subjective dimension, the dimension of feeling and value and dreams and inspiration and love, and or at least love from a spiritual sense, or the many dimensions of spirituality, which is, as you know, is vast. We can simply look at them and say, well, where are they more awake than me? Like, there's many areas that Penny's more awake than I am, and Angie's more awake than I am. And so I think we have to look at two factors. Each soul has lived a different number of lifetimes and therefore has had different periods of awakening. And the ones that are more oriented to matter, I find, are still what I call young souls. They just haven't really matured into the questions like, well, what is matter really, and where does it come from? And then those that are more awakened have reached the point, for example, where their relationship with their body changes to one of like, it's just something that carries me around, to it's something that I really love and really care for, because it's really my temple. It's the only place I can really know for sure that I am until I evolve beyond that. So in summary, what I'm saying is I think that a shift in orientation is that everybody's just at a different stage of awakening to who and what they really are. And that even people that are materialistic can be quite enlightened in other ways that we might not classically consider spirituality. A good example is there's very materialistic people out there that make incredible music. And when you listen to their music from a spiritual perspective, it's clear to me that it's coming from a spiritual dimension. They're just not aware that when spirit is moving through them, where it's coming from, because they just haven't been able to turn their consciousness inward enough to actually perceive the flow of spirit. But they're still very tapped in, or they couldn't make the kind of music they make, is the way I would say it.
Yeah, 100%.
Jason, I know you're well-versed in the application of my 1, 2, 3, 4 approach, which for the listeners is 1 love, 2 forces, 3 choices, 4 doctors, as an approach to cultivating well-being. And as you know, I often say there's no such thing as a healthy 3, 2, or 1 doctor person. One who does not have 1, 2, 3, 4 awareness can be wealthy in a financial sense, like you once were, but find themselves spending a lot of money on doctors to address physical, emotional, and mental challenges. Such an individual's narrowed sphere of connection not only leads to a sense of isolation, often from a relationship to nature and from new relationships that one naturally builds through a movement practice, such as going to a gym and meeting others, or going to farmers markets and meeting other people and farmers, and kind of getting connected to the farming vibe, engaging Dr. Quiet through spiritual practices with others, such as yoga, Tai Chi, Qigong, Zen meditation, or group meditation. And then we have Dr. Happiness, which is those that identify and engage ways to create happiness and joy for themselves, and often do so with others, such as group drumming circles, rock stacking, painting, military-style paintball connections, making music with others in general, taking classes on things they enjoy and want to explore, such as pottery or poetry. How has engaging these 4 doctor activities and practices ultimately enhanced your wealth generation capacity and your overall sense of abundance for life? And the reason I'm bringing that up, even though we have talked about this a fair bit, because there's many new listeners on the podcast grew 21 or 22% last year. And I think it's important that people have this perspective of looking at their life through the lens of 1, 2, 3, 4. So that, I'm just kind of framing my question for you, because I've watched you grow in all these areas tremendously.
Yeah, thank you so much. I want to focus on the 4 doctors here, because I think it's just such a digestible piece of information. And if you asked most corporations, is diet, movement, sleep, and happiness are those bottom line generators, most of them are probably going to say no. They think like, how is that relevant? But the fact of the matter is like they're extremely relevant, especially if you want to be a top performer. So, one of the things that I think is so important is like you have to train for work as if you were an athlete and take care of all these different buckets. And I want to show you how focusing on some of these, what we would call intangibles, actually can relate to better performance at work, more likely to get a promotion, and more likely to have an amazing idea that can generate a lot of wealth. For example, Dr. Diet. I mean, it's pretty clear to the people on this podcast, but eating good quality food that's right for your body type improves a million things, such as your vitality, your energy, your focus, maintaining blood sugar levels, mental clarity, all of this stuff. But even in a more practical way, I think people spend a lot of time each day at work just trying to figure out, what am I going to eat today?
Yeah.
What menu should I look for? And then they go and they wait in line for like 20 minutes, and then or the delivery guy, and this whole thing. And like, so one of the things that I used to do, which is like pretty simple, is I used to bring my own food to work. And that way, not only was I stacking high quality nutrition, but now I had time to digest peacefully and assimilate this. And at the same time, I wasn't wasting time trying to figure out what I'm going to eat every day and going to every restaurant and waiting in line for at least a half an hour, which is a huge distraction. And as we'll get into, one of the biggest deterrents from getting into that flow state is being distracted. So when you value your time and your attention as your biggest assets, and you value your body and you pay attention to the food, this is a simple way to have an extremely intangible, tangible result. One of the things I want the listeners to reflect on, which I think is a cool way to see how the diet as an intangible relates to their performance, is what's the kind of quality of food you typically eat? And what's the typical quality of the work you're producing?
Mm.
Are you feeling satiated by your meal? And do you feel satiated by your work? Is your food nourishing, and is your work nourishing? Do you chew your food, and are you biting off more than you can chew most of the time at work? How is your digestion and your elimination? Are you digesting experiences? Can you let go of losses, limiting beliefs? Can you let go of things? And so, how you do one thing is how you do everything. And so like the way we eat our food and the way we approach it is absolutely essential to our mindset at work. The same thing goes with your coffee and your espresso. And you've talked about this, but just doing the simple thing of putting butter or MCT oil or something like that in your espresso at work and managing your blood sugar levels. Having high quality water is absolutely essential. The level of hydration is scientifically proven by many to equate exactly to your mental state.
Mm.
And so, this is like just a brief overview of the importance of diet in your life. Then the next one is sleep.
Mm.
When you don't have sleep and Dr. Quiet, your performance is going to absolutely be diminished.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the most valuable things that I found about getting good quality sleep is having the ability to retain my dreams.
Mm-hmm.
And when you wake up in the morning, it's like you had this whole intangible thing, this whole like supercomputer running in the background for you that you can wake up while you're sleeping to get information for your day. You have the sauna and the cold plunge and these like amazing opportunities to reflect and to rest and to get into kind of altered states of consciousness and work on your edges and getting comfortable in high stress situations. You have meditation, getting into a state of gratitude and getting into a state of coherence, which is proven to attract more of an abundance frequency to yourself. There's journaling, there's doctor movement and working out in the gym and how that affects all of your hormonal levels. And especially for me, being on Wall Street, the most important thing to me was all of the working in and the zone exercises.
Yes.
Finding time during the day to breathe, to harmonize my body, to slip down into a parasympathetic state. These are all essential things. You could talk about ergonomics and its effect on posture and breathing and how that relates to your performance. Biogeometry is a big one.
Mm.
Biogeometry and creating a stable, harmonized environment. I mean, they do these studies where they put race car drivers in biogeometry designed cars, and they see that their ability to focus and have attention and their heart rate and measuring all of these variables are actually better when they have biogeometry in the car because the body's under less stress. Well, you're in the same kind of thing. You're in a high stress environment at work. You have lots of big decisions and quick things that need to happen. And when you're in a harmonized environment, it helps you make better decisions. And the last one really is Dr. Happiness. And there's so much you can say about all of these things, but for me, having happiness in my life and having a series of diversification outlets like hobbies and things that I love to do allows me to detach from work. So it's not like I'm going to jump out of a building if something goes wrong, which you see almost every day now on online where somebody says, "Oh, I failed this deal and I committed suicide."
Yeah.
I mean, it's such a high level of attachment to a particular outcome because there's no other value in their life outside of that, and doesn't lead to making good decisions. The same thing with this unbounded play and this Dr. Happiness play, in my mind, is such a lead magnet for flow states, because when we do these things that we love to do, like for me, playing the drums or guitar or singing or stacking rocks, we automatically get into these flow states and learn how to carry that over into our everyday work. It helps us with a childlike mind. Ultimately, this whole, I'll just end with this, is that, when we get back to wealth, wealth is linked to well-being, and well-being is linked etymologically to wheel. And so if you think of the wheel, and I was thinking of this when you talked about the Houston Smith cross and the idea of the axle of a wheel. But when we're thinking about a wheel, it's really like the wheel of Dharma. Like when we're doing what we love to do, when we're here and we're in service and we're working for the greater good and we're living out our mission in life, and we're really getting down to like, why did we come to this planet at this time, and what are we here to do? That's when we are truly wealthy, and that is solely in the Dr. Happiness camp. So that was just a kind of a quick run through about how these things worked. And I'll just say that the greatest practice to actually get tangible feedback about how these are working for you in your life is checking your morning heart rate, which is a technique you taught me. So for at least a couple years, I was journaling every single day about how did I do in the Dr. Diet category? How did I do in the Dr. Happiness? How did I do in the Dr. Quiet? How did I do in the Dr. Movement? And how did that affect my overall performance? And how did that affect my morning heart rate when I woke up in the morning? To have this feedback loop of taking these things that most people think are intangible and seeing how they're actually changing my everyday life.
Hello to all of you. I hope you're enjoying the podcast as much as I am. My buddy Aubrey Marcus recently visited me and he brought me a nice little gift. It's called Energy, and he was confident I'd really like it. He knows I'm skeptical about such things. It sat on my counter for about a month before I tried it because I was waiting for a day when I felt I needed a boost to get some work done. Well, that day finally came. I'd been working long hours and not getting enough sleep, but needed to conduct a 3-hour Sangha with my Spirit Gym community members. I thought, well, today's a good day to try the Correct Energy supplement that Aubrey left me. I did, and I was blown away with how smooth, opening, and energizing Correct Energy made me feel. My mind was crystal clear. I didn't have any of the typical caffeine buzz energy products generally give at all. Within about 10 minutes of taking Correct Energy, the word that kept going through my mind was, wow, I didn't think I'd find an energy boost product that could possibly work better for me than Update, but thanks to Aubrey, I did. Correct Energy provides the alchemical magic of decaf green tea, decaf green coffee, affinity paraxanthine, and other supportive ingredients. Correct Energy is third-party tested to be sure that all ingredients meet the highest safety standards for pesticides, herbicides, heavy metals, BPA, BPS, and has no glyphosate. Correct Energy is smooth, effective, and clean, and you can feel it too. If you need to be sharp for a meeting, want to have a little extra juice to play with your kids, or have some extra push for a workout, I can assure you you won't be disappointed with Correct Energy. Correct Energy comes in easy-to-carry and store packets. After using Correct Energy, I got none of the letdowns so common with caffeine-based products and other energy products. If I wasn't truly impressed, and my friends and Penny have been as well, I certainly wouldn't be sharing Correct Energy with you now. If you want the most effective energy boost supplement I've ever found, you'll definitely want to try Correct Energy for when you need a little extra boost to optimize your day. To get your supply of Correct Energy, go to KORRECT life.com/Spirit Gym. That's KORRECT life.com/Spirit Gym. Enjoy correct energy. Yeah, it's beautiful. And these are all such important things that are so often not thought about by people in pursuit of wealth or that have wealth. But ultimately, as you've made very, very clear, you're not really wealthy without these aspects of your life intact. You may have money, which is really a form of energy, but you can have a 5-pound bag of sugar in your closet too, and that's a lot of energy, but it won't necessarily bring you wealth or health or abundance from the perspective of being whole. And I think, one of the things that Jung said that it's always resonated with me is he said, I am not seeking perfection, I am seeking wholeness. And I think that's really the concept of being whole really brings us to a place where we're more likely to be able to absorb the inevitable undulations of life, the shocks of life, the losses, the fears, the pandemics, or whatever it might be. And people that are not whole don't have a high level of resilience. And so if you have a lot of money, but you have a low level of resilience, well, it's almost like you have to use that money to patch up a leak in the hull so the ship doesn't sink. And it's just very, very stressful. So I think, we're really laying the groundwork for these intangibles. But there's a question I want to get into with you before we get into the intangibles.
Yeah, and I wanted to say one thing about that real quick, if that's okay. I think that these things, I think you're totally right that there's more to wealth clearly than just money because there's so many people. Me myself, when I was 27 years old, I already had millions of dollars, but I didn't feel wealthy. I didn't feel abundant. Something was lacking. So I know firsthand this feeling of that there is more than just your bank account. But what I've come to realize is that these things that we just listed, they're not just for health. What I have determined is that these things can actually help you make money. Having a good diet, having a good exercise routine, having a good quiet practice, and having happiness in your life are actually things that can improve your ability to perform at work and to make money and to be creative. And so I think I think it's a yes and with these things.
Yeah.
One of the things that I was told by Paul Tudor Jones, who was my boss and one of the most famous investors of all time, he said, if you want to be rich, make sure you're still sitting in this seat in 15 or 20 years. It's not about like, what did you do today? Like, what's like the one great idea you had today? But he's basically pointing to having longevity and sustainability and, realizing that these things really are infinite games for the most part. And the best way to be in an infinite game is to make sure you take care of the vehicle that is playing the game, which is yourself. And so, these things like taking care of the body and all of these different things we listed help you be sustainable and help you. If you want to get to the top level of an industry, you have to have a length of a career where you're able to consistently perform. And having diseases and relationship challenges and all sorts of different other conflicts that can come out of not taking care of these will not lead you there.
Now, Jason, before we proceed with the outline that we've created together, I wanted to ask you, I've had a number of conversations because many of your abundance archetype students are Chek professionals, they're Spirit Gym practitioners. So it's quite frequent. And, I also have a lot of them around me, such as Steve Panico, who now lives on our property. And I'm often talking to them and hearing from them what they're learning from your program, and they all love it, by the way. And I love it that they love it because it is adding a whole new dimension to their life from you and different perspectives that aren't necessarily in Spirit Gym, and it's slightly different. Your orientation of abundance archetype is different than my orientation in Spirit Gym in many ways, but some parallels. And so one of the things I wanted to ask you is, of the people that come into the abundance archetype program, what do you find that you most commonly are having to address with students that's actually the impediment to their approaching wealth holistically, where you feel that you've got to help them see things from a broader perspective? And the reason I'm asking is I want people listening to know how you go about guiding people in the abundance archetype program, because a lot of people hear the concept of abundance. Most people don't know what the word archetype means. And so they think about money, but really you're helping these people deeply on an individual level. I know, for example, I've met a couple of them somewhere in my mandala workshop that they're having a hard time like getting a North Star on their compass. They're kind of like got their hands in too many pies. They're all over the place, and it shows up in their art. And some have mentioned to me, yeah, Jason's working with me on that. So I know that you're sensitive enough to pick up where these individuals need help. So I'd love to hear, what are the most common things you see, if there's a handful of them, you could say, that are kind of like the common denominators that you have to work with to get people into this sort of holistic orientation of abundance?
Thank you. It's a really good question. There's so many ways to skin that cat, but I think ultimately it comes down to belief systems.
Amen.
You've
heard that from me before.
Yeah, I think it comes down to limiting belief systems. And so, that's usually where we start. It's like you hear basically what they're saying to you, like, I'll never make this amount of money. I can never be successful in this area. I have to do this, or I need to do that. And you go down and you look at, where did these beliefs come from? Do you want to keep them? And what's a positive change that you can put in that place? One of the things that people, I think, struggle with the most is this idea of, I'll be happy when.
Right.
I'll be wealthy when. I'll be content when. And the trick of that is that you continue to need something in the future and you never actually get there. And so, one of the most simple places to start, and, this sounds like too simple, but it's actually, in practice, it's difficult to do, is to be grateful for what you have right now.
Yeah.
To find ways right now to honor yourself, be grateful for what you have, find the areas in your life where you are abundant. And even if you don't have a lot of means, to just be grateful for small things like the ability to be alive, or your body, or your family, or something like that. And by working on these beliefs and by cultivating a vibration of gratitude and abundance in yourself, by recognizing what you already have, that leads to getting more of what you're looking for.
Yeah. What I've found fairly consistently, and not only in the students that we share, but in my own students, is what I call the paradox of too many irons in the fire, and they're not able to actually put enough focus or energy or consciousness into any one thing. And especially the people that are like under 35 are often very distracted by social media and, keeping up with the Joneses and what's popular. And it's like there's a lack of an ability to center oneself. Are you seeing that yourself, and how are you helping them with that?
100%. And I think this gets into the next part of our conversation, where we're going to be speaking about mastery.
Yes.
And this comes down to finding something that you love to do, finding something that you're good at, and going to the limits of what's possible in that one arena. And we're going to discuss how basically mastering anything, investing, martial arts, dance, your marriage, your children, whatever it is, that the pursuit of mastery is the core essence of what's needed to not only be financially successful, but also to be spiritually empowered as well. And so, this one quote I like from Julius Caesar, where he says, I'd rather be number one in a small village than number two in Rome. The idea being that it's, find your niche, find your competitive edge, find your one thing. I mean, people look at me as a wealth expert, but I wouldn't actually consider myself a financial advisor or a wealth expert from a broader sense. What I was good at was I was good at one particular area of financial trading where I was studying the weather and how the weather impacted commodity markets. It was very unique. It was very niche, and it was in some ways a very small facet of the larger global markets and a small facet of wealth, the wealth industry in particular. But I became the absolute best in that one small village, and that led me to, an abundance of financial success. So I think this thing is like finding what makes you tick, right? It's a path of the heart ultimately to find what do you want to throw yourself into? What do you want to dig deep into and become a master at? And through that process, you'll make your mark on the world, and you'll bring yourself to spiritual freedom.
Yes. I will state the question as I wrote it, so everyone can kind of be on the same sheet of music. But one of the things that you're bringing up in my mind that I tell people, particularly patients, when I'm working with them and they're not healthy or they're injured, is to say, look, you've got to identify something that you love to do enough, that you have enough inspiration and motivation to overcome the inertia of life and your habitual patterning and sort of the social conundrum of the average person just not really having much success consciousness, abundance consciousness, wealth consciousness, mastery consciousness. When you have a big enough dream, you have levity, you have something that lifts you above and beyond the ordinary mundane life. And as you know, I and you have to work with people for a while because a lot of them really, they've never really actually thought about that. They've never really put any time or effort into asking themselves, what do I love to do? And what do I love to do enough to commit myself to? So with that, I'll ask the question. In regard to both wealth and abundance, you speak of the importance of mastery of oneself. You have informed me that you feel that mastery then leads to a more productive and wealthy financial life, but also to more wealth and freedom in one's spiritual life. Can you please expand on the importance of mastery, how one knows they have achieved mastery, and how can you define the difference between mastering oneself versus mastering a given skill, such as trading, martial arts, dance, a sport, or a trade, like being a mechanic?
Just before we get into mastery, just to touch one thing on what you just said, it's one of the things that I find useful for helping people is, of course, what I learned from Mendel, which is, simply looking at what did you love to do when you were a kid?
Yes.
I have a really good example about that is that it doesn't always look like in the same form as like the role. It's really kind of what is the energy behind that activity that you need to inspire you. I had a friend who was a top Wall Street investor working for, I think Barclays Bank, a major bank. And he was getting to a point in his career where he wasn't really finding a lot of joy in what he was doing, and he was thinking about leaving. And I asked him, what did he love to do when he was a kid, and what is his dream? And what he loved to do was he loved to play soccer, and in particular, he loved to coach soccer. And he said, well, how's that going to help me now? Right. I'm 45 years old and I'm on Wall Street. It's like, but the chances of me coaching soccer or playing professional soccer and making a living about pretty much is zero. I said, well, like, what did you love about it? And what he loved about the coaching was like finding and matching up strengths and weaknesses and making a cohesive unit together. And what I recognized in that moment was that he actually wasn't in the right role. What he needed to do was become the manager or the soccer coach of the traders. And he moved into a managerial role, and he looked at now this whole floor of traders, the 15, 20 people that work for him, as if they were his soccer team.
Yeah.
And who could he pair up? Who should be on offense? Who should be on defense? And this whole thing. And it brought him so much inspiration into his work and made him extremely, extremely successful by kind of getting in alignment with what he always had loved to do. You can ask yourself, if I had my 7-year-old self with me now and my 90-year-old self with me now, what would they both say about this job or this passion I'm in, right? Is my child happy and is my elder happy? And, through the vertical time, we can access both parts of ourselves in the moment. And those can be great advisors to, understanding, is this bringing me joy? And also, is this leaving a legacy that I'm going to be proud of? Those are really kind of two essential questions there. With the mastery stuff, it's very interesting because as we've already alluded to, in my deep kind of studies of the financial markets and spirituality, I've realized that what is really the building block of all successes in all these areas is essentially mastery. And when you look at, for example, the 8 limbs of Ashtanga yoga, what is this? What is this 8 limb practice? It's basically an 8-step practice to create or master siddhis or like specific powers, like whether or not they were like spiritual powers or mastery of a trade or martial arts or whatever it is. So I believe that the yogis found that like mastery is our birthright and that it's all possible for us. And actually that, in my opinion, from a spiritual perspective, it's the goal of life is to master one's life and to reach the limit of what's possible for us and to recognize in some sense our own godliness to
Amen.
perfect ourselves. And that the funny part about it is that, at least in my opinion, is that God itself is yearning to see the fullness of its creation in us.
Yep,
And that there's a relational experience that in order for it to self-realize in some ways, we need to self-realize. And so this drive to be the best in a certain area, this pursuit is really what I think it's all about, which is why Dr. Kareem from Biogeometry says spirituality is excellence in action. And he gives the example of, let's just say, a Freemason. A Freemason is there making a building, but the process of tuning in the bricks and creating the right dimensions and creating the whole environment is activating them as a spiritual practice.
Yes.
Even though they're not going and like meditating in a cave, they're doing it through the work. The same with like an Iranian Persian rug maker that spends 10 years focused and disciplined. And in that process, they're opening up to these intangibles. They're getting inspirations and creativity, and they're making mistakes, and they're learning all of these skills that are actually essential. And this, as they're making the masterpiece, they are becoming a piece of the master themselves by tapping into this greater whole that we're talking about. And so, I think that ultimately finding your competitive edge in business or finding what it is that you really love to do in life and going for that is the essential building block of what creates a master and what creates a fulfilled life. To answer your question about how do you know if you are a master, it's a very good question. And I'm curious to hear your thoughts on it. But as I've reflected upon this, I believe it's a relational process in where it takes somebody who has achieved a level of mastery themselves to almost recognize you as a master. Martial artists to get the highest level of belt have to go before other high level martial artists to approve. What is it? Who cares if you're a shaman and you could take extremely high doses if you're not sitting in ceremony and other people are witnessing what you're capable of doing? So I think there is a part of self recognition where I'm, thinking of, Buddha sitting under the tree and saying, I am, and, pointing a finger down to the earth and up to the heavens as his witness. But at the same time, if there's no one there to see that or to record that, there's really no master to speak of. So I think mastery itself requires relationship as well.
Yeah. I've got a few things to share that I wrote down so I didn't interrupt your flow. We'll go back to the kind of the childhood and the 90-year-old. When Jung left Freud and went into a crisis of self and really reached the point where he himself said, "Where is my soul?" And really paradoxically what I went through when I was probably, I don't know, probably 45 maybe. And I don't remember Jung's exact age at the time, but the picture that you gave me of Carl Jung sitting next to the lake.
Yeah, with his feet in the water there.
Yeah. Well, interestingly, what Jung did, which is so appropriate for what you were sharing, is he started taking more time off of working and seeing patients and building his institution. And he got out, he found a box with his old toy soldier set, and he went out to the beach on the lake where he lived, and he spent hours a day just playing toy soldiers on the beach. And he, like me, had a love of stones, and he built an entire separate house for himself by hand, carved symbols into the stones, and hand selected the stones, and spent multiple years. And he purposely built this house with no electricity, no running water. So when he was there, he had to live as close to the natural life as possible. And that was how he went about regaining connection to and really ultimately realizing his soul within himself. And so what you really see is the older man having a crisis of soul, of self, having to reconnect with the child, exactly what you were saying. And that brought him back into wholeness. And then your other comment, about, you were essentially saying, God needs us to evolve and recognize itself. And the way I handle that in Spirit, Jim, is, the highest definition of God that almost all religions agree on is that God is unconditional love. Well, by the fact of being unconditional, you can't know anything, or that would be a condition. So ultimately, all God can do is dream itself into relationships with the infinite myriad of beings in all the different dimensions. And that creates the condition by which love can be experienced, because without the dream, there is no condition of God and perceptible other. Key point I'm driving at, which is mysterious and magical, and many people take many lifetimes to get this. I can't know Jason's God. I can know my God. I can share my perspective of my relationship with God with you. Buddha can be fully enlightened, but I still have to deal with the level of enlightenment that I'm at. So paradoxically, every single person's relationship with God turns out to be the only relationship with God that there is. And since God cannot know itself by any other means but relationship through its beings that it creates for the experience of love and companionship, God cannot possibly know more of itself than each individual knows, because there's no way any of us can know the other God except sharing what we can share, which is kind of like the back to the cross of objectivity and subjectivity. No matter how much I share in my story, I can never touch the subjectivity of the experience I have in me in my relationship to soul, spirit, and God. The point I'm making is each one of us is God realizing itself. And this, one of the reasons this is so important from the abundance and the wealth perspective is because of the things I said earlier about all these beliefs about not having abundance. And Jesus gave it all away. And look at all these gurus that starve themselves and have nothing. But if God is God, God is infinite. God is the ultimate abundance, and everything is God. So when we become abundant, we're really becoming more like God, where a lot of people are actually negating. And I think it's sort of a confused idea of God that leads people to these sort of, again, like you said, belief systems.
Yeah, 100%. I think we're all at various levels of this process, but ultimately the purpose here is for us to embody the highest percentage possible without being the totality as we can on this planet. And that when we all get there, God's going to have a whole big party, because he sees the beauty of its creation manifested, recognizing itself as godliness in all of its people.
Yeah, exactly. And that's a beautiful lead in to the intangibles, because it's the intangibles that are what is often the greatest resistance to awakening to the truth of oneself, to the abundance of oneself. So
Yeah, I want to say something on that. I think
yeah.
what you're saying is that like here's just like a simple example. I mean, one of the greatest examples is these eureka moments, right?
Mm-hmm.
We've all had these times when we're like in the shower, we're on the treadmill, we're doing something repetitive, we take a bath, we go on a long car ride, that something pops into our head, that like a creative like light bulb goes off that we can never have had when we were sitting at the desk trying to grind it out and put in an extra 6 hours trying to figure it out. And so like the famous one is Archimedes, who was tasked with proving if a crown made for the king at that time was pure gold or not. And he couldn't
Mm.
figure it out with all of his logical analysis. So he draws a bath for himself. And as he's getting into the bath, he realizes that the amount of water displaced would be equal to his body weight. And he could use that same method to figure out if the crown was made out of gold or not. So like it wasn't him like running equations. It was him actually pushing and running the equations and then letting go and detaching, letting the thing go, slipping into a bath that these things come in. And so, I think that this is one of the most important parts of being a creative person that can create lots of wealth. Like for me to create the abundance archetype course itself, which has brought me not only a lot of fulfillment and service, but financially profitable as well. I was hunting with Monsell Denton, who's been on your podcast, and we had this moment where on this hunt, we just laid down under a tree and took a small amount of mushrooms. And in that moment, I got this download of the map of what I needed to create for this course. And, going into this time, I was like really stressed about going. I was like, I have this deadline. I have to create this course. I have so much work to do. I don't know if I'm going to get it done on time. How can I go to Texas and spend 3 days hunting? But by actually doing the work and then dropping it and laying down under a pecan tree on a small amount of mushrooms, I was able to get this inspiration that might have taken me 6 months or a year to figure out and then go back to the desk and execute it. So I think that this whole part is that we all have this 99% of the possibility. We all have this godliness in us, but most of us are interfering with that. And we maybe at times we get glimpses of it. But my whole idea is, how do I cultivate that on a daily basis to have a better relationship with these intangibles? Because ultimately that's improving me to higher states of consciousness, which affects all areas of my life.
Yeah, well, you're kind of making me giggle when you're telling me about the Monsell Denton and the mushrooms, because, one of the things that I've learned, two things I've learned in my 63 years of living fully, is that one, God's got a sense of humor that's crazy, and the thing about the mushrooms is God leaves the medicine everywhere, right? You can have an awakening during passionate, wild, beautiful sex. My first truly enlightenment experience when I was 18 and my son was coming out of the birth canal, and right when his head came out of the birth canal, I was blown into oneness with the universe. Now, I could have tried 1,000 things to get there, and that one happened, boom, right? And so it could be exercise. It could be holding your baby. It can be mushrooms, ayahuasca. It could be so many things. But I think if your heart is open to the possibility of magic, then the magic appears. But if you have limiting beliefs about God, especially, or about money, or about sex, or about exercise, or about relationships, you're like a horse with blinders on. You cannot see the flowers beside you. You just see this dirt road in front of you, and it can turn life into a real flatland. A real existential crisis comes out of that. And I think that's one of the reasons we have so much anxiety and depression and suicide in the world today.
I think it comes down to a very interesting question, which is, do you believe the universe is completely random, that it's just, atoms and molecules banging around, that the Big Bang was just like this physical thing and they created all this life? Or do you believe that there is an intelligence behind everything that we're doing? And
Yeah.
and if you can believe that there's an intelligence behind it, you can start to believe in the symbolic life. And when you believe in a symbolic life, you realize your dreams are so valuable, that your body symptoms can wake you up, that the people you meet on the street are there to wake you up, that animals that come across your path, that every encounter, that there is, they say, there's not one leaf that falls from a tree that's not supported by divine intelligence. When you recognize that everything is not only interrelated but intelligent, there's unlimited and infinite avenues for you to move towards wholeness and a greater version of yourself if you start to believe that these things are not random, and that who you meet, why things are happening, what colors attract you, songs that pop into your head, that every encounter in life is symbolic and meaningful. And try living that and then see what happens. And in my experience, it's not only made my life much more rich and meaningful, but it's made me more prosperous and abundant.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you and I, as therapists and holistic lifestyle coaches, are aware that mastery of oneself and often mastery of any skill doesn't come without facing what are often illusory intangibles from the ego's perspective or one's scope of vision. For example, one can display mastery at cultivating financial wealth, but at the same time be deeply trapped in a religious dogma or ism, which narrows their sphere of connection and often greatly enhances one's shadow. What I'd like to do now, and I think what we're both really excited to do, because the whole podcast has led to this, is explore some of these illusory intangibles that limit people's ability to reach their potential in the cultivation of financial wealth, abundance, or well-being, just straight up well-being, being whole, as Jung said. And so you and I have put together quite a comprehensive list. We'll get through as many of them as we can. The first one, and what I tried to do for the listeners, just so you know, is Jason gave me, 30 of these, and I tried to organize them so that if we ran out of time, we would hit the most important ones first. Some of them we've touched on, so we don't have to spend quite so much time. But the first one is developing one's awareness, focus ability, concentration, and capacity for meditation. So why don't you go ahead and expand on what you feel is important there, Jason?
Yeah, I think what's important, if you're okay with this, is just me going through very quickly my 8 steps to mastery that I
Yeah,
have.
please do.
That way we have a framework for these various
I
things.
love those 8 steps. When I first read them, I thought, wow, this is absolutely beautiful. And to me, it made the bell of truth ring in me.
Thank you. Yeah, so I mean, what I'm gonna touch on are pretty much all of the things that are in this list, but if we have a context and an order for how I address them, I think it might be helpful. I mean, the first one that you need to do to become a master at anything is get clear on your dream, right? I mean,
Yeah.
that's number 1 in your program, and it's what is most valuable to me and what do I wanna do with my life? And there are many things that can help in that, and I have, weeks worth of material, but ultimately working on limiting belief systems and getting into a state of gratitude, like we mentioned, for what you already have is really the foundation, and going from there towards that North Star. The second one is 4-doctor management. You can't master anything if you don't have proper nutrition, hydration, sleep, breathing, thinking, movement, and your 4 doctors. The third one, which is your posture. It's not only like having good body posture to allow for proper breathing, and like in yoga, this would be like in the asana place. Before I can meditate, I have to have good relationships. I have to know what I'm meditating on. I have to have a good diet, and now I have to have proper posture. But at the same time, it's everything in your environment. It's biogeometry, it's ergonomics, and it's what's my attitude towards life. What's my pose towards my life? After that, I take them through this concept of getting into the heart space. Words like coherence are thrown out there, but basically how to access your heart, because now you're accessing a part that has way more intelligence than your mind. Eliminating distractions, which we're going to get into as well. This is a huge problem, right? I mean, think about all the distractions that are happening all the time. Eliminating distractions, so like you mentioned, we can focus and learn how to focus appropriately. Ultimately, then through meditation or other practices, alter our state in some way to get out of our regular mind. And then ultimately we can get into this flow state, or as yoga would say, this kind of samadhi-like state where the thing that we're trying to accomplish is actually flowing through us. We just become the vehicle. So that's really kind of the structure I wanted to mention because, you know, for example, if we talk about focus or concentration, but you're eating like shit and you don't know what you're focusing on, and you're slouched in your chair, it's like good luck, right? So I just kind of wanted to bring in that framework for how I've organized these things within the weeks of my course.
Well, it's very good. And I want to expand on one of them because it often has such a mechanical gestalt in people's minds, and that is posture. And what I teach my students in the Chek Institute and anybody that I talk to about this is that people don't realize that the body is a living cosmic antenna system. Not only is your DNA tuned to a vast array of frequencies without which you could not be human, but the structure of your body, every single part of it, is geometrically tuned as a cosmic antenna system. And so, we all recognize the posture of somebody that's not happy or depressed. There's a characteristic look to it, head down, upper back rounded, kind of falling into themselves. And so Thomas Hanna calls that a red light posture. And then we recognize what Hanna called a green light posture, which is the upright, inspired, motivated, do it posture. Go get it, make it happen. And we all know that when we're happy, we smile and it brings our body up. And when we're not happy, we don't smile. But paradoxically, and I've tested this on myself 1,000 times, and this is why I tell people all the time, when you're doing Tai Chi, Qigong, or any of the inner arts, smile. Because I used to see my students would scowl. It was like, oh, they're being tortured by having to do this 20 minutes of Tai Chi ruler or zone exercise. And I say, look, you guys practice smiling because it puts you in the right state of connection to feel joy in the process. And so your mind begins to associate joy with the process of what you're ultimately doing to take care of yourself instead of acting like you're having to go take out the garbage for somebody. So I think it's just really important that people realize the position of our body and the alignment of our body changes the flow of energy and the flow of information and the type of information, which is what biogeometry is really all about. There's loads of this in traditional Chinese medicine. It's yoga, has postures for all sorts of different health challenges. I remember I had a podcast with the guy that lives near you. His name's escaping me, the older guy. We talked about power animals.
The different body shapes for different.
And so
I forget his name too.
Yeah, he turned me on to the lady that taught him, and I bought her 2 books on postures, and it showed the use of postures throughout all these indigenous cultures. So, for example, if they wanted to have communion with Great Spirit, they would have a specific posture they would go into. If they wanted to heal, or if they wanted to work in the lower realms of the earth, or if they wanted to work with their unconscious, the shaman had figured out what postures tuned to these dimensions. And these books were amazing. And I'd figured this out just through observing and paying attention to what happens in myself, doing Tai Chi, meditation, and just, in my general everyday existence. I just wanted to put that on the table for everybody, that when Jason's got posture as one of his 8 key principles, he's not just talking about setting your desk up right. That's important. He's talking about realizing that what your body is saying is often directing your mind, whether you know it or not. And that if you realize that, it's just like if you want to watch comedy on television, you got to turn the channel to something that's got comedy on it. But if you're watching the Death and Destruction Hour, hoping for a joke, you're going to be waiting a long time,
Yeah, it's really interesting because I'm looking at the kind of the biogeometry wooden figurine behind you, which I have here too. And
yes,
that you can actually measure that when you take a wooden figurine and you put its hands over its head versus in front of its heart, it's activating different chakras in different parts of the body based on the position. So this is not like, made up stuff that, when you go to hug somebody and you have your hands around out of your heart center, you're activating your heart center for that hug, and various other positions, the infinite positions that you can do.
Well, I'll add to that. Isn't it interesting that we put our ring on the finger that
The heart channel, yeah.
which is the heart meridian, right? We put a marriage ring on a finger. Now, 99% of people wearing wedding rings have no idea that finger is the ring of the finger of the heart meridian. But what are we saying? I commit my heart to you. We join at the heart, and there is an example of the psychophysical sciences at work often in people's unconscious without them even knowing it.
Well, here's another, just to riff on that. This is something that I studied for 20 years with my Tai Chi grandmaster, William C.C. Chen, who I know you don't know directly, but you know of him. And, he basically shows that, the heart meridian is running, as you said, up from the ring finger up, into the heart, up the arm into the heart. But it goes through like this armpit area, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so if you realize, like, anything you do in life, any sport, have to open this area. If you're gonna hit a tennis, if you're using a tennis racket, you don't go like this. You open it up. If you're gonna hit a golf, your arms aren't in your side. You have to open your arms to do it. Even if you're gonna unlock a door, there's a part of opening this heart channel. So when you throw a punch, it's your arm's not in, it's out. Like you're gonna knock somebody out. So essentially, every single action that we're doing, we're putting our heart into it.
Or not.
Or not. If we're doing it, when you're playing baseball or you're swimming, anytime you're doing something and you're doing it correctly, what's really happening is that you're getting into this sort of effortless flow of letting your heart do the work.
And that's really, if I had to boil it down to one common denominator for mastery, is your heart in it? If your heart's not in it, it's not a well-qualified dream. You will never stick to it. You won't pour soul into it.
It's really true, because not only will you not stick to it, but it won't lead you to the spiritual side of things. I mean, this does open up like a kind of a bigger sort of interesting long view question about spirituality. But the reality is like, if somebody is mastering something that's into the darkness, it's going to lead them to likely a place that they can't recover from, at least in this lifetime, in terms of going farther and farther into something. So the reality is like, is this what I'm mastering for the greater good of all? Even if it's making sourdough bread, if it's making art, if it's investing. When I was investing, is my doing this allow me to serve people in a way that's for the greater good of all? If you're aligned with your heart and you're aligned with an act of service, then the two will be kind of parallel. There are many people that can master things that might not be negative, and it opens up a bigger spiritual question of the importance of the darkness in holding up the light side of things. But that hasn't really been my focus as much in terms of supporting that.
Well, I think having studied this a lot and looked into this very deeply, as we have heard me say many times, and Isaiah 45:7 in the Bible says, I create the light and the dark, good and evil. I, the Lord, do all these things. And I think it's safe to say Bill Gates pours his heart into his work. I think Fauci pours his heart into his work. Every evil dictator pours his heart into his work. It's just a matter of polarity. It's service to self versus service to other. But obviously the people behind things like COVID and a lot of the crap going on in the world have poured their heart into it. They've developed very, very advanced technologies. The difference is they can only go so far before they isolate themselves so badly that they're so disconnected from source that there's ultimately a dead-end road for them. In other words, their path is like a line that goes into the emptiness, but the heart path is a circle that brings you into wholeness and ultimately into connection. And I think Ross says you can only make it to the 6th dimension on the service to self before you ultimately realize you can't go any further and you have to switch to the service to other path, but that you can grow a lot through the service to self path. And in that regard, I will admit that I've learned a lot about myself and have grown a lot spiritually by having to be honest with myself about where my actions have limited other people, or where I wasn't honest, or where I put myself first when I knew inside of myself I should put, my spouse first or my kids first. And sometimes you have to do this through hindsight. Like, I can look back on how I fathered my first child and realize I was just like, had an archetypal possession to grow myself and build the institute, but it came at his expense. And without that reflection, I wouldn't have the inspiration to heal the relationship today, and I wouldn't be near as good of a father as I've become, because of realizing that my tendency towards service to self actually led me to some kind of disconnection, pain, or the sense of having to come face to face with the mirror and say, hey, okay, you got what you wanted, but did you really get what you wanted? It's kind of like the old saying, you might have won the battle, but you can lose the war doing that. So I'm simply saying that we have to be careful about separating good and evil, because it creates an illusion that's very dualistic. And because God is all of that, and God cannot know itself without both paths, there's no way you can know the good without evil. It's impossible to do. That ultimately God says yes to everything for its own self-realization. And so I think if there's a gift to the listeners, and I'm sure you could share your own examples like I have, embrace it all, but be clear on what it is that is ultimately fulfilling to you, and what is your definition of yourself? Like, how do you want to be remembered by people when you leave the world? And, to add a little icing to that cake, I will quote Steiner: the first thing that happens when you die is you find yourself surrounded by people just like you, and you stay with them until you're absolutely sure of what you will never do again. And since I read that in one of Steiner's books, it's been like echoing in my mind. I've got to make sure that I'm really happy hanging out with myself for however long it takes, and so that the list of what I will never do again is as short as possible, because I don't want to have to become unconscious enough to have to live another lifetime where I have to go through the same circumstances to try to figure out what I could figure out with just the first thing on your list, awareness, right?
Yeah. And that starts every morning, as you know, with, can I look in the mirror and say, I love myself?
Exactly.
The ultimate is, can you love yourself today? And if you can love yourself today, you'll love hanging out with yourself when you leave this planet. I mean, for me, the ultimate goal would be there. I'd be in the greatest party because of hanging out with people just like me, and I love being with myself.
Me too.
That's the goal. The thing about the evil and the darkness is, like, I think a lot of times in our culture, we take this mindset of, like, the war on, like, for example, the war on cancer, right? And so, or like, I get people all the time that are coming to me with parasite questions, and I know that you're quite hip to this, but for example, with cancer, like, it's not the ideal thing to come in with the nuclear bomb and bomb yourself and lose all your hair with the chemotherapy. What's more important is, like, what are the behaviors in my life that led me to this situation? A healthy person has some level of cancer cells, I think, as
all
far
the
as
time. We're always killing them off. They're constantly there.
There's a balance, and the immune system is strong enough to be able to handle it. So, for me, it's more about, like, the same with parasites. If you get rid of all the parasites, you die. And so, like, the idea is not to come in with antibiotics and wipe up all the parasites. So, maybe there are times when it's necessary. The better path is to recognize, what are the behaviors and what are the things that I've done in my life that compromise my liver, compromise my immune system, compromise things so that I wasn't glowing enough light. The same thing happens in the world. I think the concept of eradicating evil is childish, but if we look at the world and we think about that, maybe there is an imbalance, maybe that there is a cancer right now where there is more of one than the other, and how do we get this down to a level where the light is the predominant one, or at least it's in a healthy balance between the two? And so, I think that's kind of been my focus. And, and I really agree that every time that you live life in the pursuit of mastery, that you are becoming a very bright light in the darkness. One candle in a dark room lights up the whole room, and that's what we can all be. It's what we all can become.
Hi, everybody. I hope you're enjoying the show. I imagine you know that magnesium is one of the minerals that people in North America are the most deficient in, but it's an extremely important mineral to have in your diet regularly. And believe it or not, Bioptimizers has improved what was already well known to be the best magnesium formula out there, called Magnesium Breakthrough. So I've got Wade Lightheart with me to explain what it is they've done to improve this already excellent formula. Wade, what is new about your new Mag Breakthrough formula?
Well, it's called sucrosomial magnesium. So we have 7 different types of magnesium in Magnesium Breakthrough because they're uptaken by different parts of the body. But a new type of magnesium has been created called sucrosomial. And what it shows in the research and science is that it's actually even more absorbable by the body, particularly inside of the brain, which is a big aspect to enhance neurotransmitter formation, as well as ensuring the rest and relax response in the nervous system that a lot of people will take magnesium for. They find it, clocks them down, helps them sleep better, allows for the relaxation of striated and smooth muscle tissue in the body, which creates an energetic relief. And so when we added sucrosomial, we were able to demonstrate inside our lab facility that we were able to get better improvements. Of course, we have a partnership with Birch International University. We have some patents we're working on, which will kind of relay some of these things. But sucrosomial was a no-brainer when we added to the formula, improved the results or improved the uptake. And the reports back from our testing team were like, wow, we get more results with less caps. And that's always the goal for our company.
That's excellent. I love it. I always say, and people have probably heard me say it before, I'm so amazed how you guys are constantly and always improving and working your best to not only make better products for us, but it doesn't seem to me that it gets more expensive as you make them better. So that's a real gift to the world. Thank you.
And now Bioptimizer's Magnesium Breakthrough is available in a delicious flavored drink powder. It's packed with all 8 forms of magnesium, sweetened with Katem fruit extract that is 3,000 times sweeter than sucrose but does not spike glucose when metabolized, and made with organic flavors and colors. Choose from fruit punch flavor, raspberry lemonade, banana mango, or add your own choice to the unflavored options. To try Magnesium Breakthrough drink, go to bioptimizers.com/living4D and use the promo code Paul10 for 10% off your first order. That's bioptimizers.com/living, the number 4, the letter D, and the promo code is Paul10.
And that's tarot number 9 right there. That's what the hermit is. It's reaching the point where you realize you need to isolate yourself so that you're not distracted by the world and you can really be present with and honest with yourself and sort of polish the mirror of the heart, as Rumi would say, which it's hard to do with a lot of distractions, but you triggered something in my mind that I think is important to share. When we're looking at issues of cancer, disease, and beliefs, one of the ways we can really look deeply into ourselves and get clear is ask the question, is what I'm doing or what has manifested in my body an expression of self or not self? For example, it's well known in cancer research that cancer cells do not see themselves as part of a community, and they go to war with the cells in the body, and they're trying to annihilate and take over the body. We all know when you get diagnosed with stage 4 cancer that it's infiltrated organs, glands, and systems beyond the point of the body being able to recover. So disease, dis-ease, what are we nervous about? What are we anxious about? What are we doing too much of or too little of that's winding the system up to the point that it cannot find homeostasis anymore? And what beliefs are actually, and this is critical because all the things that manifest in our lives are ultimately a result of actions, And all the actions are the results of beliefs. And we'll talk later about the importance of looking into the unconscious, because a huge percentage of people's beliefs are caught in their unconscious from childhood and early programming and repression. But if your beliefs or the state of your health, your body, your dis-ease, or your cancer are actually reflections of not self, then they have to manifest in a way that the pain teacher can come show you, look, this is what you're using the power of God within you to manifest. And at the kind of the pivotal axis of what I'm saying is, if we just look at our beliefs, our behaviors, and the way we relate and say, am I supporting, am I cleaning, feeding, nurturing, and protecting the self of me? And Jung describes the self with a capital S-E-L-F as everything that supports you. That's your family. That's your friends. That's the guy that makes the toilet paper. That's who makes your car, the pencil you're writing with. So to the degree that we have beliefs, habits, and behaviors that orient us toward not self, it's inevitable that it's going to manifest within us, because the body is always mirroring our psychology. There's no way around it. I mean, there's billions of studies out there that show that.
Yeah, I'd love to dig into that for a second, because, people make this mistake all the time. For example, they go out and they eat really poorly. They eat like shit. They wake up in the morning and they say, I have indigestion.
Mm-hmm.
The indigestion's the problem. Let me go to the doctor and get some indigestion medication. Or they don't actually realize that the indigestion is there to teach them not to eat like that.
Well, yes.
The indigestion's not the problem. It's the behavior that's the problem.
Well, let me add something to that before you get too far. Sorry to interject, but we often are unconscious of the fact that the digestive system is symbolic at the emotional and mental level. So, for example, you could eat great food, but if you're criticizing your spouse or you're being rude to people, then you will often have a physical indigestion that symbolically represents your inability to emotionally digest your own behavior, or your inability to digest beliefs, for example, about God that don't make any sense, but you keep banging that drum, right? God will burn you in hell for touching your genitals. But part of you says, well, that couldn't be true because they're God's genitals. It's God touching them. Now, it may be unconscious, but the key point is we need to remember that the body is not only an antenna system, but it works in the symbolic realm. And whatever you got going on in your mind manifests in your body, without which you would not feel it until you become spiritually evolved enough to be able to put your consciousness into your subtle bodies, which takes people a lot of lifetimes to do.
It's 100% true. The body symptom by nature is a secondary psychological process. So like, if we say like, I have this,
Mm-hmm.
it's like, we're already verbalizing that it's something that we're like possessing, that's like outside of ourselves and split off from ourselves.
Yes.
And the reality is that this is something that we're considering not self, that is presenting itself. You see, the same person who has a splitting headache during the day is dreaming at night of somebody chasing them with a hammer or something like that. And so all the time, these things are showing up in various ways in our life. They're showing up in our relationships. They're showing up in our dreams. They're showing up in our conflicts. They're showing up in our body symptoms.
Our lack of abundance or abundance.
Yeah, and they're all there actually as an ally. The body symptom. If we didn't have the body symptom, we wouldn't be aware that there's a problem and there's a part of us that's split off. This is a big part of my course, but I talk about actually how you can even use your body symptoms to awaken to being a better investor. Like, everything is symbolic. So if I'm about to go do an investment deal and all of a sudden I feel like a little bit of a headache, can consider that this deal I'm about to do might be a headache for me down the future. Or, if my stomach is bloated, where is my portfolio bloated or underweight or overweight or something like that? So all of these things are having, a symbolic realm. The thing that you said about cancer is that these disowned parts of ourselves become cancer-like. The same things happen in organizations when we don't actually pay to the attention to the intangibles of the organization, how people are doing, listening to their voices, what are their concerns at all levels, people become cancers of the organization. They start to work against the whole. And so these things are happening at every single level.
Lao Tzu said the government always reflects the people. It's a collection of individuals as a functional unit that are supposed to be the representation of the people. And so, we can't expect the government to be any better than we are, which is why, Lao Tzu says, if you want to change the world, change yourself.
The thing is like even the things that we talked about are why we're in such a flow state right now. So,
Yeah.
we had an intention and a clear dream for this podcast.
Mm-hmm.
We all both ate well today. We, exercised, had good food. We're talking about posture. We're sitting in a biogeometry space.
Mm-hmm.
We did some heart breathing before we got on the call. We eliminated all the distractions. My blinds are down. My phone is off. All of this. We're focusing on each other. We're allowing this conversation to take us someplace. And here we are now in the flow, not even thinking about the outline so much and having a beautiful conversation. So this is the structure that contains, when we can actually get into the state where we can allow this abundance to flow through us.
Yes. And so maybe share some of your thoughts on developing awareness, developing focus, concentration. And then, I think meditation links into all of those in its own way. But because a lot of these things, like they're talked about, for example, I'll give you a perfect example. There must be 1 billion podcasts on mindfulness, but many of them talk about it, but they're quite elusive as to simple ways of becoming mindful. And so I think when we're talking about developing awareness, I would love to leave the listeners with simple tips for each of these things wherever we can for the rest of the podcasts, so that anybody listening to this podcast doesn't have to go read a bunch of books or hire a guru or a master, because most people can gain tremendous amounts with just the smallest little things.
Yeah, where I would love to jump in is one of my favorite things is, I studied to get a certification really for my own expertise. I mean, most of the things I studied weren't for professional endeavors. I mean, it's not like I was dreaming of becoming a coach, right? I mean, I've known you for 15 years. I was only really focused on my own personal development and following what I love to do and my own interests, and bringing them into Wall Street and then pursuing these things outside of it. Never really with the intention of like creating a course or doing this professionally, but that's just really a testament to me of when you following like what is your own passion, it leads you to wealth. And I think that's a really interesting prime example. But one of the things that I was interested about is the study of open focus, because really, like, what is this kind of idea of focus? And our flow follows our attention and what we focus on. And so one really kind of interesting thing to think about is that, when you think about focus, most people would have what open focus describes as narrow and objective, right? Narrow focus excludes everything but one focal point, and objective is they're in the analyzing, examining the details of what's happening. But there's also a diffused focus where you can step back and see the big picture of something. And there's an immersed focus when you could become absorbed in the experience, right? And so most people are just looking at their iPhones all the time. They're really like examining a text message and they're really narrow focus, and they're excluding everything around them, everything that's not right there. But as you know, that's very stressful to the nervous system. It's a very kind of sympathetic, rarely used feature in ancient man would be mostly looking out at the horizon, taking in the big picture for safety reasons and for, looking for opportunities. But it's excluding so much information. So, one of the things it's interesting is even right now when you're listening to this podcast, see what it's like to notice the space in the room, the space in your own body, or the distance between yourself and the screen right now. Noticing how you're feeling in your body, noticing the temperature, noticing if there's any sounds that are happening outside of this conversation. And so when you start to open up your focus, you you can start to you can settle your system down and be in this perfect balance of sympathetic and parasympathetic, where you can actually access more information. So think about this. Think about uh, a martial artist. A martial artist is in that balanced position where they're not really thinking about exactly what the next move is yet. They're being balanced and waiting for an opportunity. They're taking in all of this information. They're starting off with relatively diffuse focus. And then there is a moment where there's an attack, when their focus begins to narrow and narrow and narrow, and they objectively are looking at what's happening and examining it. And then there's a moment of an immersion. And then after that, they can move back to this more open and diffuse state. And so, these things are happening all the time in all of the different areas. It's happening in investing. It's happening when you're dancing. Are you counting the steps and worried about where your partner is, or can you do that and fully immerse yourself in the situation? But I find that most of us are very narrowly and objectively focused, and that there's flexibility and fluidity in other types of focus. And when we open up to see the big picture, it could bring in a lot more information.
I hope you guys are enjoying the podcast. I sure am. By now, most everyone has heard of the healing power and wide variety of nutritional benefits we gain when taking Shilajit minerals. As good as it is, it doesn't taste good at all. Imagine eating rotting rocks that have passed the due date. You're probably about right. But there is an exceptional way I get my daily doses of Shilajit that tastes fantastic. That's Organifi Shilajit gummies. The texture and consistency of the gummies is excellent, and they have just enough natural sweetness to make me feel like I'm getting a lovely, healthy treat that both my body and mind can enjoy. The only problem with Organifi Shilajit gummies is that you have to hide them when friends are around, and the kids too, or you'll go through 2 bags in no time. Shilajit is a unique mineral paste from the Himalayan mountains. It contains an abundance of trace minerals, antioxidants, organic acids, and nutrient-transporting compounds. It has been known throughout history to boost vitality and strength. Just pop a couple of gummies in and chew or suck them slowly for a steady release of the delicious, earthly, but slightly sweet natural flavor. Your taste buds will enjoy the delicious treat while your body soaks up massive amounts of feel-good nutrition. Rich with fulvic acid, humic acid, vitamins, enzymes, bioflavonoids, antioxidants, metabolites, and over 40 trace minerals, Shilajit gummies can help support energy production, support performance and recovery, support healthy muscles, promote collagen synthesis, promote healthy hormone levels, increase cellular energy, decrease fatigue, promote health. I absolutely love Organifi Shilajit gummies, and I love knowing that there's something sweet that I can eat that doesn't come with all the challenges most sweet stuff does. If you'd enjoy something tasty that enhances nutrient variety, delivers the minerals your body needs, and helps you look and feel great, don't wait. Get your Shilajit gummies now. Hint, don't just buy 1 bag because they'll be gone before you know it. Get your 20% Spirit Gym discount on your Shilajit gummies. Go to Organifi.com/Chek20. That's Organifi, ORGANIFI.com/Chek20 to get your 20% discount on these amazing nutritious gummies. When it comes to developing awareness, I think one of the things to do is remember we have sight, we have smell, we have hearing, we have touch, we have taste. And we often tend to have a habit of maybe looking at but not listening, or eating but not smelling or tasting. So I think because those 5 senses are really what connects us to the environment, both internally and externally, a simple practice is, if I'm looking at my iPhone, whether that's a waste of time or not, can I also pay attention to what I feel around myself, what I hear around myself, what I smell in the room, etc.? Because what you do is you expand the field of awareness, and then through spiritual practices, those grow into the voyances such as clairvoyance, seeing through, clairaudience, hearing beyond the physical realm of hearing in the five senses. And then those things grow into, as you know, from shamanic training, an innate ability to have second attention, where you're actually aware in the background, even though you might be very focused on doing a math equation or whatever. There's always room for, I call it, keeping the mailbox open. You in the middle of doing something where you're very focused, your awareness is drawn, and sure enough, a kid's about to walk out in the street in front of a car, and you run and grab the kid. But if you didn't have the mailbox open, the kid might have been dead. So simply put, I'm saying, pay attention to the available sources of information gathering and see if you can just direct your awareness to them. And a good exercise that I actually learned a long, long time ago from Dr. Oliver, which I've tested 1,000 times, and it always blows my mind. And that is, if you're just walking, like walking through the forest or walking anywhere in a meditative state, which we classically use slow walking, Dr. Oliver says, pay attention to what you're hearing through your right ear for a minute, then switch to what you're hearing through your left ear. And after 2 or 3 times, it balances the brain hemispheres. And interestingly, you can just do that sitting in your chair, and you will actually begin to feel the body and the mind becoming more integrated. So there's a very simple practice. Just listen through your right ear for a minute, switch to your left ear, put your focus on that. Do that 3-4 times and pay attention to what happens inside of you, and you become more aware. And I think those are simple practices.
I think it's beautiful. I think with awareness, it's important to remember that our awareness or our attention is our greatest asset.
Yes.
Social media and many others fighting and paying lots of money to get our awareness, right?
Yeah.
Our clicks, 1 second longer on an ad or a reel is worth millions and millions of dollars. And so we have to recognize that our awareness is our greatest asset, and we must protect it and be very aware of what we're putting our focus on. I think we have to understand that just like the social media companies have algorithms to point back to us what we're focusing on and feeding us back more and more of what our interests are, if you take that up to a meta principle, that the universe itself has an algorithm of reporting back to you your own biases and your own interests and presenting more and more of what you're focusing on.
It has no choice because we are the universe.
Well, there you go. So, I mean, the point is I think we have to really recognize that our greatest tool, our greatest asset is awareness and presence. Like, I'll give you a simple example. Like, my kids would care less right now if I was in here making a good investment. All they want me to do is go out there and spend time with them and, play with a toy, right? It's like to them, my presence with them is worth more than gold, right? And so, I mean, I think that's the core out of it, but we have to recognize that we have to be like that child to ourselves and realize that our own awareness and our own presence is very valuable, and be very careful on what you focus on and what you actually pay attention to and who you give your presence to.
Yeah, and I think when it comes to focus, what you've listed as focus ability, one, I think it depends on awareness, but you can, for example, see if you're trying to write an email to somebody, say about work or something important, how many times did you get distracted by your phone or text messages coming in or smells or sounds that actually are inconsequential to what you're trying to do? And you can realize that you have this habitual tendency to be easily distracted. And so what you're getting is a measure of your capacity for concentration. And that is ultimately why meditation is so important, because meditation really most people are very confused. They think it's trying to stop their mind, but it's actually going behind the mind, as you know, and simply witnessing and observing the phenomena arising, like watching waves on the ocean. But the thing that's important that I'm trying to drive at here is that when we go into a state of meditation and we detach ourselves from sensory inputs and mental inputs and emotional inputs just to simply witness, we're actually creating space, which is what open focus is. We're creating space in our mind so that we actually have a container, and inside of that container, with the ability to breathe, for spirit to flow, we, through that process, develop a level of discernment on what is or is not worth being distracted by. And I think that's the beauty of is that awareness, focusability, concentration, and meditation are all cardinal points on a compass. They all influence each other, and any one of them can be used to enhance the other, which I think is quite a beautiful little reality.
Yeah, I think it's true. And I think you're hitting on a really important point, is that the death of all of those is distraction. I think what people don't realize is that flow science shows that it takes like a good 30 minutes or so, I believe, to drop into like an immersed state.
Mm-hmm.
When we first started this conversation, I mean, we probably drop in pretty quickly because we're buddies, but sometimes like you're working out the kinks at the beginning, and all of a sudden it takes a little bit of time when you're really in the flow. What people don't realize is that you cultivate all of that energy to get into this flow state, this state when you're writing something, and all of a sudden you hit this peak where your memory goes up, your creativity goes up, even your immune system ramps up when you're in those moments. Your ability to recall information, connect dots, all of these different things. Even your physiological performance is going up in these flow states. That it takes a while to cultivate that, but then what happens is a 1-second distraction can knock you out. Like, for example, if I'm in the middle of writing and I'm like in this deep flow and I have my phone on and someone sends me a text message, if I go and tend to that phone and look at the phone and read that text message and I think to myself, it's only going to take me 10 seconds to write this text message back. That's really the wrong question. The question I have to ask myself is, how long is it going to take me to drop back into the flow?
Yeah.
Once I tend to that distraction.
Yes.
And I think what happens is that we're having these distractions. We're not cultivating these environments where we can actually work smarter, not harder or longer. That if we want to sit down and write something, it makes sense to carve out a 1 hour of your day when you're completely siloed, phones are off, you create the right environment, you do your heart breathing, you do your various things, and then bang it out. Because if not, you might be there for 4-6 hours dealing with distractions and getting the same amount of work done.
Yeah, and it brings me to wanting to share too, like when I was a paratrooper and we'd have to go to the shooting range quite a bit, and it's a competition. Anytime you go to the shooting range, you're not just competing with yourself, but you're competing with not only everybody in your platoon, but all the other platoons and companies. They want good shots in the military. But, when I used to be on these courses with pop-up targets all the way to 400 meters, and oftentimes you only have 1 to 4 seconds, depending on how the computer regulates the targets, but you really have to knock everything else out. You can't pay attention to the shooters on either side. It's kind of like when you're bowling. If you get distracted by the guy in the lane beside you, you're not going to bowl very well. So you got to really learn to just focus. And then other things, Zen is a well-known path to self-mastery and spiritual mastery, but Zen archery, you really have to focus with a bow and arrow. Juggling takes a tremendous amount of focus. If you get distracted, you drop the ball, even if you're just doing 2 balls. And I know from the gym, anytime you're doing things that are challenging your balance, like kneeling on a Swiss ball or trying to do curl to press on one leg, you have to really bring your awareness and your focus right into your body or you'll fall over. So I think there's little things that we can do to enhance meditation, concentration, awareness, and focusability So what I'm pointing out is when you go to the gym, if you use the right exercises, you're getting there. If you want to practice, try archery. Try, going to a shooting range and shooting at some targets, which is really fun and a great skill to have. There's all these little things that we can do that are fun that often aren't that expensive. Like anybody can try kneeling and balancing on a Swiss ball. And there's a ton of stuff you can do on a Swiss ball that will enhance all of these qualities, because otherwise the ball lets you fall off and you get your report card.
This is a really important point. And I think it comes down to, as I'm reflecting on it, that actually, in a lot of ways, every moment of our day becomes an opportunity to practice, right?
Yes.
When I'm making my coffee, am I present with my coffee?
Mm-hmm.
Am I smelling the aroma? Am I watching the grind? Am I making the right cup? Or am I just going to 7-Eleven or Dunkin' Donuts and getting a big gulp, right? When I'm making my tea, am I present with my tea? There's a whole Zen practice around, the pouring of tea and making tea. When I'm playing with my children, am I there, or am I listening to a podcast, or is my mind, 14 other places, which tends to happen. The same thing with the gym, the same thing in conversation. Am I listening to the person I'm with, or am I thinking about what I'm going to say next? Am I with my partner when we're making love, or is my mind on, something else? Like all of life becomes an opportunity to immerse yourself in that moment. And all of these lead to not only a richer life, but to have to have these abilities transfer over into every aspect of your life. The root word of ritual is R-I. And re is a Sanskrit word for the laws of nature. Now, if you look up all of the re words, there's creativity, arithmetic, reading, writing, rhythm, rhyme. Everything is like getting into ritual.
Mm-hmm.
Everything is with the R. And that's the essence of the word rich, R-I-C-H. When you want to have a rich life, you have a life filled with ritual and being aligned with nature. And so the more that you can really immerse yourself in everything that you're doing and make your life, make ceremony not something that you have once a year, but to make your life as a ceremony and to celebrate that, it becomes so rich. And all of these skills transfer over into your work life as well.
Yeah. One of the things that I had rise up in me as you were talking is, and to expand on what I talked about before with archery and all the things I said, balancing on a Swiss ball, like I really find when I paint, I go into a flow state, but I'm very aware of what every brushstroke does inside of me. I'm very aware of how every color affects me. And I'm also very aware that when I let my ego go and just let my soul or my spirit guide the process, that the outcome is so much more magnificent. I often shock myself and go, I don't even know how I did that. And so once again, it's like we can actually use the things that we love to do the most, which means you're more likely to do them by simply really saying, I'm open to mastery. I'm open to being fully present just so that I can paint better or make a more beautiful rug or make my yard look more beautiful. And I think why that's important, because this is what I call practical spirituality. Like a lot of people just talk themselves out of the spiritual life because they say they don't have time to meditate or they don't have time to go to the temple or whatever. But really, it's another one of God's jokes. I mean, everything around you with intention and attention and awareness can be a spiritual practice. And nobody makes better bread than the baker that loves to bake. Nobody fixes a car better than the mechanic that loves auto mechanics and machines. And no one's a better dentist than someone who is enthralled with the complexity and beauty of the human bite, teeth, jaw, mastication process, and all those things. But I want to sort of bring what I'm sharing to a very important point. And that is that the more we grow our spiritual awareness through awareness, focus ability, concentration, meditation, and all the things we're talking about, the more information is available to us at any given time. Somebody who has second attention has a lot more information available. Someone who has open space in their mind has a lot more access to information, not only in this dimension, but in the dimensions that pour down into this dimension. And a good example of that is intuition. If you're constantly distracted, your intuitive access is not limited, but your capacity to receive what intuition. The mailbox can be full of messages from God and you don't even know it. And you're walking around living this life of a lack of abundance, not realizing God's just sent you 50 letters in the last 2 days, but you're too busy watching shit on social media to get still and see and feel what the intuitive impulse, which comes from the whole cosmos, is giving you. The more information we have, the more capable we are of creating an integrated environment in anything we do. Like if you only understand nutrition, but not hydration, breathing, thinking, and movement, you can't really fully integrate yourself because there's too many foundation principles missing, which would be like saying, I'm going to build a beautiful house with only one side of the foundation. The other three I'm going to skip to save money. Well, I got news for you. Your house is going to fall over before you even get it built. So when we realize that God is unconditional love, the word information literally means putting spirit into formation. In formation. And so through this level of awareness and these practices of expanding our perception, when we have an intention, we draw more and more information, which gives us much more to work with. It's like more colors in the artist's palette, more musical instruments for the musician to create with. And I think ultimately these are like critical aspects of abundance, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think one of the big things about awareness is learning to trust your experience, right? To believe in yourself. That when you're out walking in nature, if you feel called to turn a particular way, to trust that. If you feel called to, if some particular animal or some particular stone or leaf calls to you and your awareness is drifting towards that, to believe in that process that there might be some meaning or some message in that for you to uncover. Believe in your dreams, believe in your ability to do these things. I think a lot of this stuff comes in trusting myself, that I can trust my own awareness and that it's leading me towards something meaningful.
And on that, I tell my students, you be conscious of the fact that the word believe means, now I'm not talking about a dictionary definition, just what my soul taught me. The word believe means to be live, right? When we say, okay, Jason, the podcast is on, here we go. We are being live. If you're on stage, once you step on stage and start playing your instrument, you are being live. So whatever we believe, we actually make live. And so we have to be very conscious of being aware that if we don't believe that we can use our intuition, you're making that live. If you believe you have intuitive access or that you have support from the spiritual dimension, you're making that live. And I think beliefs are the most common blockage to accomplishing anything. It's crazy. If you believe you can't juggle, no matter how good your instructor is, until you heal that belief, that instructor is just going to have a real challenging time with you.
It's true. Another play on believe is we be leaving the present moment.
Right.
We're out, right? It's a leave of absence. We're gone because we've already had a preconceived idea of what the outcome is going to be or what's possible. So we're no longer, we can't be live because we've left.
Amen to that. Yes, that's very, very true.
As a therapist that is constantly teaching people about nutrition and hydration, I've found that the only people that really understand and use electrolytes are endurance athletes. But what most people don't know about is the importance of electrolytes for general health, mineral nutrition, improved hydration, blood sugar and insulin regulation, enhanced vitality, and enhanced brain function. Though there is a rising awareness of electrolytes and many companies offering them, I can assure you that they are not all created equally, and what that usually comes down to is the quality and cleanliness of the source materials and how they are combined. Having tested many electrolyte products, I was honestly shocked when I experienced Paleo Valley's essential electrolytes. Why? because I eat a super high quality diet and back it up with the world's highest quality whole food supplements to guarantee a full spectrum of nutrition. And I'm a lover of high quality salts, so I thought for sure I was getting enough electrolytes. When Paleo Valley sent me their essential electrolytes to test, I was honestly shocked at how much more energy I had. I even experienced an improved level of mental clarity that I didn't expect from an electrolyte drink, of all things. Paleo Valley's essential electrolytes are available in orange, watermelon, and lemon lime flavors and is a whole food sourced electrolyte blend. Get the complete benefits of trace minerals and electrolytes found in unprocessed ancient sea salt, organic coconut water, and seaweed extract without the refined sugar and synthetic ingredients in most electrolyte drinks. Though Paleo Valley's essential electrolytes are good for children and adults, I feel this product may be one of the most important dietary additions for anyone age 50 and beyond, because the benefits that essential electrolytes offers addresses many of the problems common in aging people today. In fact, I've been adding them to my daily health and performance shakes since the day I first tried them and will continue to do so. To get your essential electrolytes and save 15% on your order, go to paleovalley.com/Chek15. That's PALEO valley.com/CHEK15. If we want to make the world a better place, we've all got to stay healthy and fit and support companies like Paleo Valley, because they're a perfect example of the kinds of companies we need more of in the world today. Enjoy essential electrolytes.
Jason, these are all such amazing things. I love talking about this, and I love talking about it with you because you really have devoted yourself so much to these practices. So I know that it's not just words for you, it's lived experience. I'd like to expand a little bit on belief systems, limiting beliefs, and family patterns, because these are really the bedrock of a lot of what limits people. We've had a little introduction on belief, but what are some of the common belief systems that you run into in your Abundance Archetype program that you have to address with people and help them, shall we say, heal or transform?
I think it comes down to really that young quote that you often reference about anything. If something's happening in your life, take a deep look at the inside, that's manifesting on the outside, so to speak. We call it, he says, we call it fate, but it's really the unconscious projecting itself. I think simply what my students face is that if there's a time in their life when they're trying for something, you're trying to do something consciously, but it's not happening. No matter how hard I try, I can't get over $50,000 a year, or no matter how hard I try, I can't find the perfect mate, or whatever it is. That's the time when you have to say, okay, stop. What is the unconscious programming that's running the show here? Because the unconscious is way more powerful than the conscious mind, as Bruce Lipton and many other people have, ad nausea explained. And so we have to realize that we have a relational blueprint, and we also have a wealth blueprint.
Mm-hmm.
We have a blueprint around how it is that we viewed money, what our relationship was, what the important people in our life, our society, our culture, our religion, what their views are on money, and how that has shaped our beliefs about what it means to be in the workforce, what it means to be a man, what it means to be a woman, what it means to be a provider.
Especially our parents.
Our parents can definitely impact that, and the thing is that I think is important is that we have to honor the places where those come in, and they're very positive as well.
Yes.
I think it's easy to focus on the negative. For example, we have a really easy time counting all the mistakes in our life, and we have a very hard time counting all the blessings that we've had, right? It's like we see the good things in other people, and we don't recognize the negative. We put them on a pedestal, and we think their life's perfect just because they're like a celebrity or something. At the same time, all we do is we focus on our own negative traits, and we don't really see the value in ourselves. So I think we have to look at, as well as the positives that our parents gave us, and the amazing things that even our religion gave us, and how that formed us into who we are today. But the reality is that what we're talking about is that who we think we are is shaped on our previous experiences. And we have an opportunity, for better or for worse, to look at them and say, is this what we want to create going forward? And this is the level of belief system. And as you said before, our beliefs are generating our thoughts, and our thoughts are generating our feelings and emotions, and those are generating our actions. So if there's an action that's in your life that is generated by an emotion and generated by a thought, you have to look back at what is the underlying belief that's generating it. There's the famous quote, "I think, therefore I am." I think it's actually more appropriate to say, "I believe, therefore I am," because we basically are a product of what we believe to be true. And most of us are putting limiting beliefs on ourselves. It could be like beliefs that for example, sometimes I work with investors who say, like, every time I get up a certain amount of money, I wind up giving it back. I wind up making a mistake, kind of a self-sabotage. And when you get down to the root of it, there's a belief that I'm only supposed to make a certain amount of money, and above that might not be safe. Maybe because when I was a kid, I witnessed something bad happen to somebody that had a lot of money. And so I developed this belief system now. Having too much money is not a good thing. And I have now the opportunity with that awareness to say, is that what I want to believe going forward? The technique that I work with, and there's many techniques. I mean, you have plenty that you teach your students, but I specifically teach a technique that I learned where it goes through basically muscle testing to look at a belief, to ask your body, are you able to let go of the belief that love in life means I can't make that more than $100,000? And through the muscle testing, if your body goes weak, it's saying, I don't believe that. I can't let go of that. And then through a series of tapping techniques where you're hitting the acupuncture points, I help you unlock that belief and then put in a positive engram. And it's really, getting back to flipping the coin and the various techniques that you teach as well. But I think the root of all of this is, what do we believe to be true? And we really forget that we have this blueprint that is guided around us towards safety. And the reality is that when we're sitting here as a 40, 50-year-old man or woman, that we're not the 7-year-old child that needed that belief system to be safe. Maybe we grew up in a household, for example, where there was not a lot of safety around. So we started to believe that it's not safe to get close to people. Well, that may have been true, and that may have act as a protector or something that was positive at that time, but it's not necessarily the truth now. But most of us are acting out the belief systems of, let's say, the 7 or 10-year-old inside of us.
Yeah, a couple of thoughts that rose to me is, one, your belief systems, conscious and unconscious, are the greatest influence on your sense of self. And they're also what creates your worldview. So what you think is going on in the world, are people safe? Are we going to be okay? Et cetera, et cetera. Who are the good guys? Who are the bad guys? What's the purpose of life? Those are all your belief system projecting it into your reality. And we know that for sure, because standing right next to you is someone who maybe goes through COVID and thinks, wow, what a great opportunity for us to wake up to what we've been unconscious that we're putting our money into and who we're supporting in government and corporations. But the guy over here is scared to death. This guy thinks, finally, the awakening is here. The other thing that I think is important is to remember the 3 qualities of the soul that Plotinus gave us. Abiding goes right back to developing awareness, focusing, concentration, and meditation, because you got to rise above the phenomenon to make space to observe objectively. So we always have the witness function in us. That's God in us as subject. Then to reflect is to look back. And Socrates said the unexamined life is not worth living. And I think this is why a daily practice of reflection and just looking at, how did my day go? What are the beliefs that I held that actually came true, for better or worse? Just simply observing that. And that's why reflection is so powerful. And meditation really is a process of observing the phenomenon. And what's manifesting in Jason's mind while he's meditating is different than everybody else in the room, because we all have different unconscious contents and conscious contents that produce the phenomena. And then the third quality of the soul is to represent yourself. So if I caught myself thinking I'll never have enough money yesterday 6 times, today I'm going to flip the coin on that. I'm going to turn that, and I'm going to use the power of my thoughts, my words, and deeds. I'm going to name it. There's my self-defeating beliefs about money. I'm going to blame it every time I think that way. I feel less, I feel smaller, and my future doesn't look as bright. I'm going to tame it. Thank you, Great Spirit, for showing me where I have a mind virus about money. And then I'm going to state what my dream is. I do have abundance in my life. I'm grateful for all that I have, and I'm willing to pray and move my feet and create more abundance for myself so I can share it with everybody. And so I think these key things, remember your self-view, your worldview is a living expression of your beliefs, and that we all have these three qualities of the soul that we can witness, we can reflect, and we can represent ourselves in ways that are more congruent with our stated dream, goal, or objective. I think these are like critical foundational points.
I think so. And, it's funny because, I think like this path towards abundance or this path towards individuation is less of, using a financial term, is less of investing and more of a divesting. If everyone spent each day saying, what's one belief system I could let go of today? Well, how could I be more open to more ideas instead of becoming more and more rigid, which most people do as they age? So it's really, in a lot of ways, I'll give you an example. I had a client who came in and she was saying, my business is doing really well, but I feel this urge that even though I want to go and spend more time with my family, that when I'm home, I feel like I need to be working. And
Yes.
when we went into this belief system, there was this time in her life when she was 8 years old and her dad lost his job and he felt like a depression because he felt like his sense of self-worth was tied to that job. And so she doesn't feel like she's a good parent when she's not at work, even though she's created this abundance at her job. And now she has employees and things are thriving. So what I work with her to do is, I don't want her to have a belief in either direction, meaning I want to give her fluidity. I want to give her the ability that if she's at home and she feels really called to go in because it's an important client or an important day, that she has the ability to go in and leave her son at home. And at the same time, I want her to have the ability to be at home and to enjoy her life and to spend time with her kids and detach and let the employees take care of the work. So I think this whole idea of belief system is, in some ways, it's not about even putting in the opposite. At times, it could just be opening up to being live again, to be able to act accordingly to what's needed in that moment based on the situation and not being pulled in a direction unconsciously by a program.
Yeah, no, just to enhance on your divestment comment, there's an old saying that I really love. Don't ask your doctor what you should take. Ask your doctor what you should take away. And because most of the things that cause health problems are things that we shouldn't have in our diet and our lifestyle. But we go to the doctor and say, what pill should I take or what drug should I take to make my problems go away? But that never works because you're not actually looking at the issue that's causing the problems, which is the beliefs and the behaviors. So we really have to sort of don't ask what I should take or do to avoid this. Ask what I should take away, whether it's the belief or the habit pattern or the insecurity or the fear. And then we really then we're doing core healing is what I would describe.
A lot of times that's the same case in business too, right? It's more like, what do I need to trim?
Yeah. And that's what the archetype of justice is all about, right? She's got the sword in one hand, the scales in the other, and her function is to trim off anything that's going to throw her people, society, culture out of balance. And I think that's where the Buddhist god Manjushri with the flaming sword, she's the god of discernment. And I think really to balance ourselves at every level, we have to have a level of discernment, which we cannot have without a clearly stated dream, goal, or objective and core values, which is why I say your yes has no value till you learn to say no. And you cannot do that until you clearly establish core values in the key areas of your life, or you don't know when to say yes or no.
And the same thing, I think, even with personal finances, as I'm all for spending money and having the most beautiful things, but your ability to live the life you want to live can sometimes be supported by looking at what needs to be let go of. If we're all honest, if we look carefully at our credit card bills, how many apps, $3.99, $7.99s, how many different services and subscriptions and Netflixes and things that we're paying for that we don't actually need. And if you add up all of these little death by a thousand cuts, they could add up to hundreds or thousands of dollars a month that you're paying towards things that you don't really need. So, a lot of times I think in all areas of life, it's really looking more at what we can let go of. We have to recognize that in a lot of ways, the answer that we're looking for is us. And
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
it's a lot about trimming the fat away from ourselves on the layers we built up, the limiting beliefs, the places where we're not, living towards our core values, or we're spending money that's not serving us, and really kind of rest more in the elimination and delegation process. I mean, you could think about, what tasks can I eliminate from my life? What tasks can I delegate to free up more time so I could produce more? There's a lot that can be gained by going through the path of elimination.
Yes, I think all these things that we're sharing back and forth with the audience are critical, and many of them I've had to explore in my own life and still do. Even after you think you've cleared something, the longer something's been in the unconscious, the more rooted it is in every belief that builds out of it. So sometimes we don't realize that we're pruning something at 3 branches high on the tree. We think we got it. We don't realize it's coming from a lower level. And this is why I think, the reflection process each day to see what are the repetitive patterns that keep coming up, even though we think we've pruned them off the tree of life, and then really focusing more and tracking that back, like you said, to your childhood or to certain experiences, like the lady you described. This is where spirituality becomes very, very real, right? It's very tangible. It's not just memorizing scriptures out of books and saying I'm spiritual because I can quote the Bhagavad Gita or the Bible. It's like, am I living true to my heart and to my dream, and participating in the relationships that are essential to my life and that are actually expressions of who I am? And that's when we really hit the bedrock of spirituality. But before we run out of time, please give us an overview of the Abundance Archetype program and anything that you think is important for the listeners to know about, so that they really have a greater sense. I love your 8 principles. I've loved them since I first read them when you built the program. And so that's a great overarching look at some of the key principles. Please share whatever you feel anyone listening should know, so they can really come to a place of discernment as to whether or not they belong in that program with you.
Yeah, thank you. The abundance archetype has been really my joy, because it's really forced me to integrate my own process. It's really looking at this whole trader life, this entrepreneurial trader investor side, and then this whole kind of desire to be a spiritual person, to explore shamanism and healing modalities, and then ultimately realizing that if I wanted to be who I was meant to be, I had to put them together. And so the process of the abundance archetype is, first and foremost, with me exploring and integrating my own life. And then through that, being able to share it with my students. Well, I found that I have lots of people that have some meaning in their life, but they don't have the means, or they have means in their life, like they're successful, executives or heads of companies and things like that, but they have no meaning. They don't have the health, they don't have the well-being, they don't have the relationship or the love or the purpose. And so it's really, as we talked about today, it's putting the tangible with the intangible and putting these things together to create, ultimately heart-based leadership and mastery in an individual to make an impact on the world. So, my course, I have the digital course, just like yours in Spirit Gym, which is an 8-week course. But the whole experience that we do in the Abundance Archetype is typically 1 year, where the students come in for a year, they get the digital course, and they do that on their own. But the experience of being, as I'm sure you felt in Spirit Gym, is the whole really benefit is actually being in community.
Yes.
Actually, when I first started this, I thought that I created a digital course and the community was like a secondary thing. But what I learned was that the community is the asset. Like we had a retreat last year where we all went to Mount Shasta, and like getting people together that have worked together online for a year was such a magical moment. Like the friendships and the networking and the resources that we can draw on from each other. So we meet twice a week on Zoom. sometimes once, sometimes twice, depending on the week. But we meet online. I bring in amazing guest speakers like yourself and many other people, and I go deep into all sorts of these kinds of topics, answer questions, do live coaching. So it's a group experience. It's also a personal experience. You also get some one-on-one time with me, and we're essentially working on mastery and allowing you to share your gifts in the world and get paid for it in an appropriate way. Yeah, so that's essentially it. It's the autonomous digital course. It's the community. It's the shared forums and things like that where we're all sharing resources, and it's being a part of a mission of people that want to improve themselves and get paid to do it, and to let that be their love to the world.
And you've got a beautiful PDF that gives an overview of the program, which is just gorgeous. And so, where do you want to direct people to learn more about the course, sign up, get the PDF, and whatever else you offer?
Yeah. So thank you. So if you go to jasonpickard.org, you just enter in your email address, then you can download my free guide, The 8 Keys to Greater Wealth and Wellbeing, which is essentially the 8 keys or the 8 steps to mastery that we briefly went over today. And there's a lot of information in there. I mean, it's like a 25-page document. So if you just download that, you'll get a lot out of just going there. But if you feel called to learn more and to connect with me, we have an application process where you actually get on a call with me, and I could walk you through what we're doing, and we can see if you're a good fit for the program. And I found that people who get on that call with me, they usually get 30 minutes with me, and they're on there, and we always get into some kind of coaching, whether or not it's their childhood dream or some belief or some challenge. So even if you're just interested in you're not sure, and you go on the call and you decide that it's not for you, or I decide that you're not a good fit, I'm sure you're going to get a lot out of it. So go to jasonpickard.org, put in your information, get the free guide. From there, you'll get an email which will enable you to book a call with me. And for anyone listening to this podcast, if you say you were referred by Chek, Chek, you'll get $500 off the yearly price for the Abundance Archetype.
And I would like to just close by making a very important statement in regard to the Abundance Archetype or any meaningful training, whether it be Spirit Gym or investing in yourself. And that is that one of the key limiting factors of people entering high quality programs like this is they always classify it as an expense. But there is no greater investment than investing in yourself and in your own growth, because you are actually the epicenter of your whole life. And when you can get taught by someone like you that's clearly achieved a high level of financial abundance and spiritual abundance and relationship abundance, I mean, that's how you achieve mastery. Like the hero's journey always includes a hierophant. It always includes some kind of a teacher or guide that helps you prepare for the ordeal that the hero is going to face. And I think just holding the mindset that I'm investing in myself, I'm investing in my growth, I'm investing in my dreams, I'm investing in my abundance, I'm investing in my life, I'm investing in my relationships, really changes the whole experience. Because instead of it being like, buying a nice stereo and you think every month, oh my God, this thing's costing me $500 a month. Now your orientation is, wow, I'm so glad I'm spending this money, because it's like putting money into your garden. It bears fruit, it's not an expense. And I think that's a mindset shift that's important, because I watch so many people talk themselves out of really good opportunities because they're looking at it as an expense. And I think when you're dealing with these types of issues, that's the wrong way to go.
I'm glad you said that. I think that this process is recognizing that I myself, or you yourself, are the ultimate intangible. And so investing in yourself, going deep into yourself and seeing and recognizing that you are your greatest competitive edge, because there's nobody else like you. And when you can get down into really understanding that you are completely unique and that you have something to offer that nobody else has, you will get paid for it. And so many of my students have made huge returns on their investment by what they're doing in the world based on the information I gave them. I mean, there's so many people that are practitioners and coaches. And it's like, it took me 20 years on Wall Street and 20 years of spiritual growth to put these things together. And I'm giving to them, and they're able to instantly use it with their clients. Plus I have, people that are in real estate, in chiropractic offices, all sorts of things that are using these tools to actually make more money than the course costs before the year's even over. So, that's my mindset. I'm always looking like, how can I get an extra advantage? How can I push myself? How can I grow? What can I invest in? I'm willing to invest any amount of money in something if I can expect at least a 3-to-1 risk reward on it. Meaning, if I'm going to invest $1,000, if I can expect with a pretty high probability I'm going to make at least 3,000 back, I'm going to do it. And I'm willing to do that up into any amount, as long as I'm not putting my family at risk by, betting the whole farm, right? I mean, there's a limit to it. But, if somebody comes to me and says like, well, I don't know, should I invest $2,000 into something? Well, my answer is, why not 3? Like, the question is not how much are we putting in, but what are we going to get out of it? And I've seen time after time again, so many people come into my course and take what I've learned, integrate it, and actually get a return on investment and make money by going through the experience, which to me is the most gratifying part.
Well, I think one of the key factors in life is you always get out what you put in, right? You could be with the greatest master and teacher in the world, but if you don't participate, then you're getting yourself back, right? And so I think when we really, one of the first things we talked about was the importance of mastery. And so I think it's very important to get clear in your mind before you enter into the Abundance Archetype program is, am I willing to really pour myself into this so I can get the most return out of it? Because ultimately now you're investing in yourself. So you're going to get to see a living mirror of your own participation. And that is ultimately how we learn, grow, and achieve mastery in anything. Is are we really pouring ourselves into the process, or are we just kind of half-assing it? And then it does become an expense, right?
Yeah, this is a call to action. I mean, the corporate world needs people that are turned on in leadership positions. Obviously, psychology departments have not been working great because we have people that are more disturbed than ever. There's, tons of coaches out in the world, but people are unhealthy. There's even tons of healing schools and shamanic schools that are running things that are completely out of integrity. So, my goal with this is to bring people in and give them the tools that they can be leaders in the world, bring us to a place of that godliness that we're all pointing towards and ultimately going to make it to. But, the idea would be to get there a little bit easier and a little bit sooner than infinity. So.
Yeah, exactly. All right. Well, I'll just say thank you. What a great podcast. I mean, I always love our dialogues together, whether it's in person, on the internet, on the phone, or by text or whatever. And that's one of the things I know the Abundance Archetype brings and Spirit Gym brings, is these beautiful relationships that last a lifetime, change. You meet amazing people, you feel inspired, you learn from each other's challenges, and that's what our 15 years together has been, just an amazing experience of, dolphins swimming together and having now and then to deal with a killer whale or two, but coming back together and continuing to learn and grow. So thank you, Jason, for all your commitment to mastery. And thank you for creating the Abundance Archetype program. And thank you for being here and for so many great podcasts and many more to come. And thank you to my sponsors for your amazing products. And thank you for anything that you buy from the sponsors. You're taking better care of yourself. You're putting money in the hands of companies that are really doing a lot for the world. And you're also spending money on products that are organically farmed, regeneratively farmed, and are making the world a better place for all living beings. And thank you to the podcast team for all your love and support. And thank you all for really putting to work everything we shared today and being the center of your own universe and going out and making the world a little better place for all living beings. So again, thank you, Jason, and thank you, all of you.
Thank you. A whole great spirit.
Oh, it is done. It is done. It is done.
Thank you for listening to Spirit Gym with Paul Chek and today's guest, Jason Pickard. If you're feeling the call to go even deeper into abundance mastery, you can take the next step by joining Jason's Abundance Archetype program. This 8-week course and 12-month mentorship program is for those who want to embrace overflowing abundance in every aspect of their life. As a Spirit Gym listener, you'll receive $500 off when you join the Abundance Archetype program. Just mention Paul Chek in the How Did You Hear About Us box. To get started, you can book a free discovery call with Jason at jasonpickard.org and explore if the program is the right fit for your next level of growth. You're also invited to check out Jason's free resources, the Inner Wealth Code and the 8 Keys of Greater Wealth and Well-Being. Go to jasonpickard.org to claim yours now. You can also connect with Jason on Instagram at jasonpickardofficial. And finally, if you enjoyed today's episode, please consider leaving us a 5-star rating and a warm review on the podcast platform of your choice. This podcast is available on Apple Podcast, Spotify, Amazon Music, Audible, and YouTube.